Chapter 137. Registered name, or in other words, magic name. Just like how sorcerers in the legends had all kinds of nicknames and names, scholars who focused on research would receive a name that only existed in endless knowledge when they started their apprenticeship. It was either given by a mentor or searched for on their own. Whether it was in life or after death, it would always exist as a personal symbol, so it was often entrusted with special meaning and power. There were even legends about true names. Even after some scholars died, their names still existed in their formulas, just like pericusal. As long as the special alloy represented by this name was added to the formula, the metal's activity would increase by 3%. The legendary creator, at the top of the pyramid of scholars, their names themselves were a kind of magic that existed in matter. For example, Newton's name had long been written into the bottom of the great arcanum Zarathustra, and became a part of the law of the present. The 3 laws that he wrote down had been imprinted everywhere in the present. Compared to this, Schur was even more surprised that the girl in front of him was a scholar, which was rarer than a sublimator. In fact, alchemists could also be classified as scholars, but later on, they separated on their own and formed the Stone Cauldron Society. They were no longer controlled by the Pioneers, an organization of scholars. Strictly speaking, whether it was a scholar or an alchemist, in fact, their status was higher than that of a sublimator. After all, it was a technical profession which was innately monopolized. Unlike a sublimator who worked physically, those who worked mentally were born to be in the upper class. To others, the profession of scholar was essentially no different from that of mage. If it were somewhere else, Schur might have to put on a smiling face and call Lily master, to let her take a look. After all, scholars with a registered name had at least mastered more than one law, which was more than one kind of magic. As a profession that was better at creating than destroying, it was natural for scholars to be more respected. However, this also explained why Lily chose to go to the New World. After all, from the early 16th century to the Second Industrial Revolution in the late 19th century, it was a dark period where the Holy Spirit genealogy constantly suppressed scholars. After all, the laws adhered to by the Holy Spirit genealogy were fundamentally different from the laws adhered to by the scholars. The contradiction between creationism and the theory of evolution was more than just a little, and the harbingers had been rejected by the Church for more than a day or two. The Pioneer Society could no longer stay in Rome. They had exiled themselves to the 6 Isles of London, which was still a remote place at that time, and had been there ever since. It was not until the split of the Holy Spirit lineage in 1740, and the Industrial Revolution led by the scholars began to flourish, that the offensive of both sides reversed, and the harbingers took over the mainstream. This led to the birth of the Astronomical Society, which later controlled the entire world. Before this, all the scholars were considered heretic. However, they hadn't openly fallen out with each other, but the battle in private had gradually heated up. A scholar staying in Rome was like Archimedes squatting at home, waiting for the Romans to kick down his door. It was unwise. They could be doing research at home, but one day they would be hung on a stake. It was not surprising that they wanted to leave. Van Helsing still had several experiences of assassinating famous scholars in his memory. Out of respect for the scholar's profession and Lily's privacy, Schur did not ask in detail about the subjects she studied and the laws she mastered. Anyway, except for the typical system of mechanics, most of the other scholars' laws were useless in a fight. After understanding the general situation, he nodded, picked up the coat on the bed, and put it on again. Then, before we reach the New World, you can hide here. Take it as a reward for saving me during the day. No need to refuse. Schur said, I'll rest in Eugene's room. When I find food on the ship tomorrow, I'll send it to you. Be careful, it's not safe here. Thinking of old Shaw who died in his room, Schur's heart could not help but sink. If I were you, I wouldn't choose to go out at this time. Lily looked at him with a strange look against the seemingly eternal night outside the window. After nightfall, it's now hell outside. Why sure was at a loss. What happened? During the day, the poison in the food in the restaurant. Out of curiosity, I collected some samples and used your alchemy equipment to test it. Lily raised her finger, and there was a test tube between her fair fingertip. A wisp of grayish-black color floated in the colorless liquid, like a wisp of black cotton wadding, slowly swimming in the liquid. Out of respect for our relationship as allies and for my personal safety, I have to ask first. Have you eaten the food in the restaurant? If you have eaten it, do you have any cases of gastric ulcers or gastrointestinal bleeding? No. Huaisher shook his head frantically. That bowl of thick soup was disgusting. How could he dare to eat it? Moreover, as a vampire, he could survive as long as he had blood. He had just eaten a full meal on the body of the spring demon. He estimated that he could last for many days. In order to prevent the poison in his blood, his canine teeth had a purification holy seal. Once he sucked blood, he would burn himself, let alone other things. As for gastric ulcers and gastrointestinal bleeding, that was even more impossible. That's good. Lily breathed a sigh of relief and slowly put down the book in her other hand. What exactly is this? Huaisher asked. In essence, this is a powerful viral stimulant. Lily shook the test tube in her hand slightly. It is afraid of light and heat. It has a tenacious vitality. The speed of cell division is abnormally fast. Can infect almost all living things. As a virus, it has unimaginable activity. Once it enters the spinal cord through the blood circulation, it will quickly spread. In 4 hours, the immune system will be paralyzed. After 6 hours, it will spread in the brain, disrupting the hormone balance of the human body. It will stimulate the secretion of large amounts of adrenaline and dopamine, forcing people into a state of excitement. At the same time, they will enter a state of hunger that cannot be dispelled. In the end, even the source substance will be contaminated by it. It will collapse in the high heat, stimulating all of the host's strength and forcing the body to undergo mutation and organ proliferation. Are you sure this thing is not the T-virus? Huaisher was dumbstruck. This description is completely talking about zombies. I don't know what the T-virus you're talking about is, but if it's a zombie, then it's not wrong. After all, it really is one of the origins of all the living dead type legends in the world. Lily calmly said, compared to the so-called T-virus, I'd rather use a more professional term to call it wolfbane. In that instant, Huaisher finally came to a realization and couldn't help but grit his teeth. Fei, Shou. That guy had been lying from the very beginning. What werewolf? That guy was clearly a Lycan. Ignoring the fact that he was also full of lies from the beginning, Huaisher was suddenly filled with resentment towards that traitor Fei. Werewolf and Lycan, these two terms seemed to only have the order switched, but in reality, they came from two completely different words. The so-called werewolves generally referred to the calamities and miracles that originated from Greece, monsters that were cursed by the gods and turned from humans into wolves. Starting from King Lycaon, all the citizens of Arcadia had the element of wolf transformation planted in their blood. Once they attempted to sublimate, they would become monsters that couldn't tolerate light. Lycans were completely different. They were usually used to describe wolf-type abyssal creatures that took on the appearance of humans. It could be traced back to many wolf-type monsters and holy creatures in legends. They were usually considered to be the mortal bloodline of some wolf-type deity. It was like the difference between curry that smelled like dog poop and curry that smelled like dog poop. Even if they looked similar, they were two completely different things from the beginning. The most obvious characteristic of the latter, apart from its extremely rare quantity, was its body fluid that could be called a mobile source of infection. In legends where Lycans lived, a large amount of wolf head grass would grow. Alchemists harvested this kind of wisteria-like plant and could extract the poison that turned humans into living corpses. It could be said to be an endless disaster. It could be said that the bad reputation of the werewolves was not only due to their bloodthirsty nature, but more than half of it was due to this kind of knockoff that looked similar. Recalling the information that Yin Yen had mentioned and Lei Feizhou's actions, whether it was the stigmata that claimed to be a werewolf, or the first discovery of old Shaw's death scene, or the huge black plastic bag that was specially brought back from the kitchen if he was a traitor, then everything made sense. Whether it was killing Yu Jun on the first night, or taking the initiative to take the initiative when old Shaw did not react, and then poisoning the food in the kitchen, all of these could be perfectly linked together. Huai Shi even suspected that if he had not been hit by a stick, and instead returned in a weak state and was discovered by Lei Feizhou, he would not have been alive now. Other than Lily's accidental help, he probably had to thank the green spirit who threw the magical insoles and boots into the soup. If it was not for the disgusting taste, he might have frowned and drank a few mouthfuls like the others. Thinking of this, he suddenly froze. Then, he heard vague screams and roars from a distance outside the room. The chaos had already begun. It was now 1620. This group of dark creatures that had been besieged and wiped out by the Holy Spirit lineage for so many years could not guarantee a good diet. Long-term consumption of inferior food would inevitably lead to stomach ulcers and digestive tract bleeding. Once they drank the soup, they would most likely be poisoned. Then, the scale of the poison now, Huai Shi's scalp began to tingle. Chapter 138. Outside Huai Shi's door, chaotic screams and roars could already be heard. Someone ran out of his room as if he was running for his life, but immediately after, he was pressed to the ground by his companions who had already fallen into madness. Then, they ate him heartily. "Help! Help! You bunch of lunatics!" That terrified voice screamed, wanting to ask for help, but it attracted more and more lunatics until finally, it was drowned out by the greedy chewing sound. There was no more sound. But soon, more voices were heard. Those were murmurs, and murmurs that no longer had any reason. Those murmurs that were like sleep-talking echoed in the intermittent roars, entangling people's ears. The disjointed and meaningless words annoyed Huai Shi, and he couldn't help but feel a surge of killing intent in his heart. He wanted to chop the creators of these murmurs into pieces. Everyone who murmurs must die. He panted violently, feeling dazed. It wasn't until a glass of cold water was splashed on his face that he woke up under Ai Qing's cold warning. He was sweating profusely. "What's going on?" He looked at Lily blankly. Lily was speechless. She stretched out her hand and pointed outside the broken porthole of Huai Shi's room. Between the dark sea and the sky. The sky was like an iron rock, pitch black, but one couldn't tell whether it was far or near. It seemed to be untouchable, but it pressed heavily on everyone's heart. It was hard to breathe. The strange sea was still calm, without even the slightest ripple. But on the mirror-like flat surface of the sea, a waning moon that didn't exist in the sky was reflected. The waning moon was scarlet, and countless rays of light were emitted from the haze, like slender blood threads extending in all directions. The scarlet waning moon didn't ascend to the sky, but sank to the bottom of the sea. In the endless abyss, it coldly stared at a group of earthly ants. Then, it sprinkled madness. Just looking at the red moon that looked like a broken eye, Huai Shi felt his vision turn black, and he coughed dryly in his throat, thirsting for blood. "Curse!" Huai Shi whispered softly. With the descent of Evernight, the god's curse on these abandoned people finally reached the surface of this empty sea. Under the illumination of the scarlet waning moon, all of their minds and rationality would be pulled out bit by bit. Then, their instincts and desires would be revealed without any concealment. Thus, the dark sea had turned into a curtain, and this cruise ship was a carefully arranged stage. The abandoned people would surrender to their original sin bit by bit, performing a final farce for the gods. But at this time, No, it's obviously at this time. Ai Ching said coldly. If it was really Lei Feizhou who did it, then he must have colluded with the gods who intercepted us. Perhaps this is his secret mission. If it were any other time, the people on the ship would inevitably be affected, but at least they could restrain themselves. However, who could guarantee that they wouldn't be affected by the wolf disaster at this moment? As long as there was a trace of killing intent, it would be magnified thousands of times. In other words, it seemed that as long as one guarded their mind and was a good person, they would be safe. This might be the last mercy of the gods. Unfortunately, which of the people who boarded this ship could restrain their innate sins and choose to be a good person? Once they were used to solving problems in bloody ways, they would inevitably be devoured by their own violence and madness when encountering such a situation. Then, they would burn themselves in the flames. Including Van Helsing. Above the red moon in the sea, Huai Shi retracted his gaze with difficulty, feeling dizziness and pain in his trance. It was as if his blood was flowing in reverse. He staggered back a step and sat on the ground, panting violently, cold sweat oozing from his forehead. He had clearly just sucked in a mouthful of blood, but now he felt an indescribable hunger and thirst. There was a burning sensation in his pocket. He took out the hot coin and saw the red-hot cross mark on it, as well as the angry face of the archangel on the back. Holding the thunder fire and thorns in his hand, the whip from the Holy Spirit lineage had now descended on him. F***ck. He involuntarily screamed and shrank his body, feeling the sharp pain seeping from his bones. It was the Archbishop's order and urging him to complete his mission. Now. Immediately. The Church's surveillance had never been far away, and Huai Shi's long period of slacking had finally brought about a bad outcome. The blood punishment engraved in his bones began. Along with it came an irresistible thirst and bloodthirst. The precepts that had long been engraved in his soul were like red-hot silver, tearing his soul apart and rewriting the irresistible order on his body. Find Paracelsus, and burn that damned, deformed child and his blasphemous creation to the supreme gods into oblivion. Our Father in heaven, may people honor your name as holy, may your kingdom come, may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. In a trance, he heard a soft whisper like a prayer echoing in his ears. Drops of cold water fell on his head, extinguishing the flames that seemed to want to burn him. Drops of water soaked his cheeks like soaking dry land. He opened his eyes with difficulty and saw Lily, half kneeling on the ground and praying softly, with a cup of water in her hand. The remaining water droplets in the cup dripped onto his face bit by bit, bringing with them wisps of holy light. It was as if he was being baptized again. Through this ritual of bathing, the original sin was washed away. The holy water made from the prayers of believers diluted the pain, diluting it to a tolerable range, giving him a chance to breathe. Lily stretched out her hand, opened his mouth, and rudely flipped his teeth. She glimpsed the silver alloy that had been poured into the pulp of his teeth, and could not help but frown. So cruel! Who engraved such harsh precepts on you? Aha, let's just say, it's from my old father. Huai Shi gasped, got up from the ground, took the cup, and drank the last bit of water in one gulp. Finally, he felt a little alive. Just a little. Ai Ching, what's wrong with my card now? There's a new status called Punishment of Breach of Oath. Ai Ching's voice was hoarse, perhaps because the dizziness had not ended, even her voice was a little fuzzy. It has increased your stamina and toughness, but before you put the silver coin into Paracelsus blood, there will be a test every 6 hours, causing pain and reducing HP. 36 hours later, the status will end. I'm free, Huai Shi asked. No, you will be killed. Ai Ching bit her lip, held the armrest tightly, and did not tell him the second half of the sentence. Along with me. On the back of her pale hand, purplish-blue veins bulged. The intense pain still lingered in her body, destroying what little willpower she had left. As Huai Shi's condition eased, she finally had the strength to breathe. She wiped the cold sweat on her face and looked at KP. Is this also your trick? The so-called life and death together, isn't this the same thing? KP's palm supported his chin, looking at her embarrassed appearance. Why didn't you tell the kid the seriousness of the matter? You should have let him be a little vigilant, right? If he knew the consequences, he wouldn't be so passive and slack like now. Yes. Ai Qing nodded slightly, looking down at the thin piece of paper representing Huai Shi, and couldn't help but chuckle. That guy, as long as there is pressure, no matter what he does, he will be fast. If you use a little bit of this information to guide him, no matter what kind of task it is, he can complete it beautifully, right? But you don't understand one thing. I'm not your hostage, and he won't be your puppet. Ai Qing raised her eyes, staring at the smiling man in front of her, and told him word by word, KP, this game between us is not over yet. Before I smash your chessboard and dice in your face. No matter what you want, I won't let you get what you want. KP's expression froze, and then he raised his eyebrows, as if he was looking forward to it. I'll wait and see. In other words, we have to act now, right? Huai Shi finally came back to his senses, and took out his equipment from the suitcase, putting it on one by one. In such a turbulent time, I'm afraid that other people with ulterior motives will take the opportunity to take action. No matter what, this is a good time to complete the mission and plot. I can only say that Lei Feizhou did a good job as a supervisor. Ai Qing coldly said, if you want to stay out of this, the gains will not make up for the losses. We have already been involved, and it will be too late when the other side comes to break down the door. Okay. Huai Shi nodded, and finally put the axe on the buckle behind his waist, and twisted his stiff neck. Let me see what that traitor Lei Feizhou wants to do. Lily looked at him getting ready to go, and shook her head unhappily. Are you still going to go out? After all, the old fathers can't wait anymore. Huai Shi looked down at the brand mark on the back of his hand, and helplessly shook his head. After I leave, you seal the door and don't let anyone break in. I thought you would ask for my help. Lily looked down at the entry in the book, and nodded. Are you going to keep this favor and use it later? What kind of favor is there? Huai Shi couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. Even without me you will be fine, right? Compared to her easy and comfortable double body, he, who spent half a day and didn't even save a single person, was really inferior. How could he have the face to ask for a favor? If you don't ask for anything in return, why would you spend so much effort to save someone who has nothing to do with you? She frowned, puzzled. Are you saying that you are the kind of person in the book who will be happy to help others? Just take it that way. Huai Shi waved his hand indifferently. Although I'm not sure if it's to be a hero or vanity, there is one thing I'm sure of. He took one last look at the girl in front of him, and softly laughed. When I found out that you were still alive, I was really happy. Admiring her dumbfounded expression, Huai Shi pushed the door open and closed it behind her, sealing off the safe and narrow space. Then, he used the short knife to nail the ghost that pounced on him to the opposite wall. Blood spurted out. The living corpse struggled with all its might, but soon its nerves were disintegrated by the poison in the sword oil, and it no longer moved. Noisy screams and roars sounded not far away, and the pungent smell of blood filled the air. It was simply refreshing. He felt the surging fierceness and killing intent in his heart. Come. Facing the black shadows that were rushing towards him, Huai Shi took a deep breath, and the corner of his mouth raised in a ferocious arc. Let me see if your development is normal. He took a step forward. Stepped into the disaster caused by the wolf disaster. Chapter 139. The chaos spread faster than expected. In this segment where everyone was like a bird startled by the twang of a bough, even a little spark could lead to a tragedy of a big explosion, let alone a dozen ultimate rabies patients running around and spreading the virus. Using those unlucky people as a breeding ground, the wolfsbane had entered the spreading period from the initial incubation period. It could be said that the roots were strong and the branches were strong. After completely transforming the host into a lunatic with a brain full of eating, it began to spread in the victims. Secondary infection. Even if the following replanting of the wolfsbane had lost its infectious power, its ferocity and nature still did not change. The number of rampagers skyrocketed 10 times in an instant. Everyone was in danger. Even those who were not infected fell into madness, attacking anything that dared to approach them at all costs. At this moment, the murmurs and crazy roars of the rampagers were everywhere. The whole ship was full of chaos, sailing in the abyss as if it was falling, and its speed was getting faster and faster in the narrow corridor. Blood and wreckage were scattered everywhere. The infected wandering around hoarsely murmured words that no one could understand. They were driven by the hunger that filled their souls, looking for anything to eat. In an inconspicuous corner, a figure suddenly hung upside down from the ventilation duct. The axe in his hands swept across and instantly cut off the head of an infected person. Huaishur landed and stepped on the head that still wanted to open its mouth to bite him. He turned the axe handle upside down and smashed the head into a pile of mush. The corpse that lost its head was still staggering stealthily, and it suddenly did not know that it had died. Huaishur looked around and saw that there was no one else around and breathed a sigh of relief. This was not the brainless zombies in the movies. Although they were also brainless, this thing was simply a super zombie. Before being infected, these guys were all out-and-out dark creatures. They were either born with inhuman blood or fallen ascendant. Each one was harder to deal with than the other. Now that they had become a lunatic who was not afraid of death, their minds were even emptier. They did not know what fear was at all and dared to rush up when there was food. If he was surrounded by these guys, Huaishur didn't dare to say that he could escape. He had run all the way here partly because of his recklessness and partly because of his cowardice. It was all because he ran fast and had good skills. After getting rid of the guy blocking his way, he stopped fighting and rushed straight ahead, seizing the opportunity to hide. Even so, the smell of blood on his body was still detected several times by those who had an excessively sensitive sense of smell. Along the way, he didn't know how many tragedies he had witnessed. Even those who hid in their cabins and didn't dare to come out had been bitten to death by these guys. There was simply no safe place. Huaishur, on the other hand, was not worried about Hela. She was a scholar, after all. Even if she could not fight, she could still protect herself with the purification aura of her believers and the various means of the scholar herself. He was more worried about himself. He was about to lose control. Huaishur raised his head and drank the entire tube of blood. He wiped his mouth and suppressed the feeling of nausea. At the same time, he also endured the comfortable feeling of drinking sweet dew. The two completely different feelings were about to drive him crazy. Too much blood, too much death. No matter which one it was enough to arouse the desire of a vampire. Abraham Van Helsing's predatory instincts and his frenzied thirst were growing more and more uncontrollable. Even if this killing force was so strong, Huaishur did not dare to let himself be immersed in it. God knows if he would become Huaishur or Van Helsing if he became addicted. The creed and ice-cold will that was engraved in his bones constantly affected him. The Book of Destiny could pull him back once, but when he was completely changed by Van Helsing's origin substance, who would he become? Pinching his nose, Huaishur held the axe in his hand and suddenly kicked the door open. As expected, the room behind the door was empty. This was Lei Feizhou's residence. That guy had specially chosen the place furthest away from his teammates and placed the room closest to the warehouse, which was also the source of the outbreak of the chaos. He had probably already escaped and would not give Huaishur any opportunity to take advantage of him. What was left in the room was only a torn Bible and countless pages that covered the walls, floor, and even the ceiling. Those pages filled every inch of space and overlapped with each other. However, there was a blood-red color that crisscrossed between the overlapping pages. The red marks that looked like printing errors became complicated and mysterious patterns after overlapping. In the end, countless intricate red marks overlapped and intertwined to form a solemn emblem. The emblem that represented the Holy Spirit lineage. Mobile sanctuary? Huaishur looked at the scene in Lei Feizhou's room, dumbfounded. He felt like the back of his head had been split by an axe and was hallucinating. What's going on? What the hell is this? Why does Lei Feizhou, a Likan, have a mobile sanctuary that is equivalent to a miniature church with him? Isn't this very simple? Ai Qing said calmly. The Likans themselves have some unclear connections with the gods. It's a bit of a stretch to count them as a group of dark creatures that failed in the struggle. No, it should be said that the Likans were created by the gods from the beginning. It's normal to have connections with the Holy Spirit lineage. Otherwise, it would be impossible to grasp the timing of the blood moon's appearance so accurately. Now, we just have direct concrete evidence, so there's no need to make a fuss, right? No, since he's a member of the Holy Spirit lineage, isn't that an ally? Huaishur was furious. Why are you stabbing me in the back? Why shouldn't I stab you in the back? Just because you're an ally? Ai Qing asked coldly. Besides, are you really his ally? Huaishur was stunned. He finally found his blind spot. What was the Holy Spirit lineage thinking? Since they had already sent him on board, why did they send Lei Feizhou on board as well? Since Lei Feizhou was related to the gods, he should naturally be on the same side. They each had their own missions, but they should also be able to cooperate to a certain extent. Now it seemed that this chaos was most likely related to Lei Feizhou's mission to stir up chaos and weaken the effective power of the White Crown King to the greatest extent. Then, why didn't the Holy Spirit lineage tell them about each other's existence? It caused them to hide from each other, and then caused the two traitors who should be on the same side to stab each other in the back. Well, it was only Huaishur who was stabbed in the back by Lei Feizhou. No, they did it on purpose. Ai Qing concluded decisively. The Holy Spirit lineage deliberately didn't tell you and him the specific situation and sent you on this ship. What for? Huaishur asked. There are two reasons. First, the threat of persecution is too high. Even if Lei Feizhou is on board, the Holy Spirit lineage has to send their own executioners to purposely remove him. But because this mission involves a secret that must not be known by others, the Holy Spirit lineage deliberately chose to do this. Even if there is a risk of killing each other, this secret must not flow into the ears of a second person. What about the second reason? The second reason is even simpler. It's simply the simplest workplace routine. Ai Qing said coldly. They hope that Van Helsing, after completing the mission, will die on this ship. Huaishur was stunned. If I'm not wrong, this is Van Helsing's last mission in his life, Huaishur. Ai Qing said calmly. Tools are consumables. Once the mission is completed, there is no need for them to continue existing. Just replace them. Van Helsing knows too much and has done too much. Perhaps his results are too good, so good that the controllers above are worried about the consequences of him losing control. But in order to achieve the goal, they have to continue using him. Then, the best result is to completely destroy him after using him. Persecution must be killed. He must not be given a chance to fish in troubled waters. But that secret was too terrifying. Van Helsing must be killed. He must not be allowed to set foot on American soil alive. This was the purpose of the Holy Spirit lineage, to end everything on this ship. Let everything sink into the abyss of the ocean. For God, for justice, for everything, however, they did not expect that Van Helsing would not be able to complete his mission even after delaying for so long for Lei Feizhou to launch the plan. Huaishur kept touching. The big model touched wildly and lost patience when he touched the Holy Spirit lineage. There was still no sign of persecution. They did not even expect that there would be a believer on the ship. A believer who could temporarily suppress Van Helsing's commandment. In the end, they are a group of big shots who sit in the office all day drinking tea. They did not even think about it before using their brains. Ai Ching sneered. The more meticulous the plan, the more tragic the problem will be after encountering a problem. Patting your head and singing a few hymns, you think you have everything planned for God. But once you are shaken, you will reveal your flawed nature. You never thought that no matter how complicated the plan is, everything will be useless from the moment the ship leaves the coast. That's probably what they call being smart. Then, that bastard Lei Feizhou is our opponent? Yes. Ai Ching nodded. Not the main one, but the most troublesome one. Damn, you are forcing me to be a traitor. Huaishur groaned unhappily and looked down at the coins spinning at his fingertips. Traitor? It was impossible for him to be a traitor. He would never be a traitor in this lifetime. Even if Van Helsing knew that the Holy Spirit lineage wanted him dead, he would still complete his mission. On one hand, it was because of his sense of mission and faith that he would not hesitate to sacrifice himself. On the other hand, it was because of the commandments that had been deeply embedded in him since the day he became a vampire. Now, the indelible source substance and the commandments engraved in his body still remained in Huaishur's body, forcing him to carry out his own main storyline. Now, there was only one more branch, and there was nothing to be happy about. Boom! Just as he was pondering, there was a sudden earth-shaking explosion. Even the steel ship under Huaishur's feet suddenly shook, as if something had exploded. But what followed were hysterical screams and roars. It came from the direction of the restaurant. It was Barbara's voice. Chapter 140. Loud noises kept coming from the ship, as if a terrifying battle was taking place. Even though she was far away from her homeland and had aged to this point, Papaya's power was still enough to make the steel ship tremble. It was as if she wanted to tear the entire ship apart. The woman had completely fallen into a frenzy. What's going on? Huaishur turned around in confusion, but he suddenly felt that something was wrong. He quickly walked to the window, violently smashed it, and reached out his hand. There was a gust of wind blowing. But it was completely different from what he experienced a few hours ago. In this quiet abyss of the sea, there was nothing as luxurious as the wind. These were the waves caused by the cruise ship's speed, but now, Huaishur felt that something was wrong with the turbulent airflow. The ship seemed to be moving faster. On a ship that is trying to travel to the underworld, every soul is a heavy burden. A voice sounded. It was Yin Yen, who was standing at the door. He tilted his head and looked at Huaishur, who was still in shock. He smiled mockingly. Do you understand now? Although the gods were cruel, the White Crown King did not pity them. Rather, it could be said that the god's curse was exactly what he wanted. What he wanted was not the weak, but the strong who could survive this trial. This was the command he engraved on the ship. If you just run and endure, the passengers will never reach the new land. The fuel it needs is souls and death. The more people die, the faster it will go. Huaishur turned around indifferently and raised the axe in his hand. Why are you here? To help you, of course. Yin Yen shrugged and leaned against the door frame. I remember we were allies. Your secret is to kill someone, right? As he spoke, he took out a palm-sized notebook from his pocket. The leather cover was covered with scratches and looked like it had been there for a long time. The name of the ship was branded on it, Mayflower. In addition to that useless manuscript, in fact, I also found this on the captain's remains. It's a gift from the White Crown King to the astute one. Yin Yen smiled proudly. It's a passenger list that records the names of all the passengers and their real identities. With this, it's easy to find anyone. What do you think, Huaishur? No, I should say the vampire of the church. Abraham Van Helsing. He pointed out Huaishur's real name and proved that he was telling the truth. I already know where the person you're looking for is. He put away the passenger list. "Come with me." In the silence, except for the screams and murmurs in the distance, Huaisher suddenly heard Ai Qing's sigh. "It's been so many years, but you always like to think that you're smart, cousin." At that moment, the girl's killing intent. Huaisher, kill him. Without hesitation, Huaisher pulled the trigger of her crossbow. Boom! As the wall shattered, the young man's figure emerged from the broken crack. He staggered backward and stepped into the corridor. The rampagers who were wandering in the corridor suddenly turned their heads and looked at the dark-skinned young man. Their expressions suddenly became ferocious and hungry. They suddenly pounced on him and cut a groove on his face. "Beggar, get lost!" In his rage, the pharaoh raised his scarlet eyes and waved his hand. Under his wide robe, countless golden rays of light flew out. The sacred beetles that were residing in his body rose up and, like bullets, instantly tore the intruder to shreds. Immediately after, a bandage appeared from the gap on his face, and the handsome face was once again mended. Mummy. No, it should be called the embryonic form of the path to godly ascension. This was a sacred mark unique to the pharaohs of Egypt. Every priest who was qualified to become a pharaoh would receive this sacred mark and obtain an immortal body. Whether it was knives, axes, frost, or fire, it was difficult to kill them. After passing through the path of Aulices, they received the recognition of the gods and were bestowed with a sacred soul. They became the lord of the upper and lower worlds, who combined the gods and humans and wore the red and white crowns. Now, although this soul bestowed by the gods had been taken back, the embryonic form of the sacred soul had not left. He still retained his once noble bloodline and power, and he would not allow any inferior beings to violate him. But this seemed to be unable to stop the crazy old woman. Barbara gurgled. She was roaring, screaming, roaring crazily, cursing, spitting out dirty words that no one could understand and cursing with deep blasphemy. She stared at the Sphinx in front of the pharaoh, and there was a purple blood stain at the corner of its mouth. It was so conspicuous. "It's you! It's you, you bastard!" she screamed furiously. "You dare to kill my poor child, my only child left! I curse you! I curse you! You damned beast! I swear that you will definitely sink into the depths of this sinful sea with your master. I swear!" She screamed hysterically, reached out, pulled out pieces of organs from the rotten chicken's body, and threw them at the Sphinx. They were just rotten organs, but the Sphinx did not dare to take them head-on. It kept dodging. Filled with Papaya's curses and the grudge of Poppy before his death, Poppy's innards had turned into a real bullet of vengeance. Countless viscous venom and black shadows spewed out of it, flying in the air, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws as they slammed into the Sphinx, leaving whiplash marks on the body of this mixed-blood divine beast. Each whiplash mark tore through the flesh, leaving deep traces of decay. The Sphinx had turned into its original form, a Sphinx with a human face. However, its size was not as terrifying as its father's. It was only a few meters tall. There were still traces of the beast on its face, and there was no light of wisdom in its eyes. Instead, it was filled with the ferocity and anger of a beast. It was a degenerate or a bastard. Just like its master, the pharaoh's guard had lost the power to search the soul. All that was left was the strength and life of a beast. However, it was still enough to fight Barbara head-on. It was not at a disadvantage. "Kush!" The pharaoh roared and glared at the old man who was sitting in a wheelchair in the dining room. "Do you want to break the covenant? Just because my guard ate one of your damn chickens? If this is your wish, then I can bestow upon you the destruction that you have always dreamed of." The old man was silent. He just stared at the bowl of soup in front of him that had already turned cold. It was as if he had Alzheimer's disease. However, those rampagers who had turned into wolves did not even dare to get close to him. Even if they only smelled his scent, they would retreat in panic. It was as if they were running away from their natural enemy. Even if he looked like an old man who was about to die. He held the spoon with his trembling hand and poured the venom into his throat with trembling hand. Drop by drop, slowly, until the bowl of thick soup full of wolf venom was drunk into his stomach. He put down his gold-rimmed spoon, picked up a napkin, and slowly wiped the corners of his mouth. Enough, Yaga. Kush raised his head tremblingly and stared at his crazy sister with his turbid eyes. Dinner time is over. How long are you going to behave atrociously? Yaga suddenly turned around and stared at him angrily. Scream. I said enough. Kush raised his voice as if he was angrily rebuking. However, as he advanced, he coughed violently and spat out the wolf venom in the soup on the ground. Let's stop here. He looked at his sister and decisively issued a notice. In the language of his hometown, he said word by word, "Forget about that damn chicken. Forget about the broken house that had nothing but bones. You've been in that damn hell for long enough, my dear sister." Yaga's face was ferocious as if his eyes were about to pop out. He glared at his brother. Is that why you brought me to another hell? Kush suppressed his cough and said in a hoarse voice, I just want to set you free. Freedom. Yaga laughed wildly. Look at this place. A broken ship that is doomed to sink. An inescapable curse. My dear brother, is this the freedom you're giving me? Curses can be broken, Yaga. Believe me, Kush said hoarsely. I promise we'll have a new beginning in America. Now, there's just a little problem. A little. But before he could finish, he began to cough again. It was a heart-wrenching sound. The hollow sound was as if his lungs no longer existed. It was painful and sharp. He clutched his throat, opened his mouth, and gasped violently. Until Yaga came up to him and pulled his hand away. She took out a small silver flask and poured the magic potion brewed by the witch into his lungs. Carefully, one drop at a time. In an instant, the coughing stopped. Kush collapsed on the chair and gasped violently. He could not speak. Only Yaga lowered his head and looked at him. After a long time, he shook his head in disappointment. Brother, you really broke my heart. She did not say anything else. With a choked sob, she carried Bobby's body and turned to leave. In the silence, the pharaoh's applause sounded. What a good show! The boy sneered and tilted his head to look at him. Kush, how are you going to compensate her for her offense? Kush did not speak. He only gasped for breath. After a long time, he picked up a napkin and wiped the saliva from the corner of his mouth. He leaned on his wheelchair tiredly. Amon Messiah, do you know? Kush suddenly said. Respect is mutual. Respect? The pharaoh was amused. You actually said the word respect to me? Yeah, isn't this a topic between a homeless stray dog and another homeless stray dog? Chapter 141. Yes, isn't this a topic between a homeless stray dog and another homeless stray dog? Koth finally raised his eyes and stared at the boy in front of him with murky eyes. Am I not in awe of your former title? Even if you only held it for less than 2 days, you still received the courtesy of a pharaoh from me. Or should I say that a priest who has lost his favor asks for more charity from me? The hoarse voice was filled with the fury of the immortals, the shapeshifters, and the demon king. If you want my respect, perhaps you shouldn't have refused the sacrifice of the snake. Before you were chased out of that chair, you should have died with honor, instead of dragging out an ignoble existence like a stray dog. Amon Messiah's expression twisted. It was as if there were countless insects crawling underneath. He had such a handsome face, but at the moment, he was as ferocious as a devil. He gritted his teeth and squeezed out a voice from between his teeth. Oh, Kush, you've really broken my heart. So, the Sphinx raised his eyes and stared at the old man in front of him ferociously. Likewise, the old man in the wheelchair looked back indifferently. If you want to walk off this ship with dignity, don't offend my family anymore, Amon Messiahs. This is the last warning an incompetent elder brother can give you. In the silence, neither of them spoke. There was only the sound of whining in the distance. After a long time, Amon Messiah's expression finally calmed down. Very well. He took a step back and said in a cold voice, Sphinx, let's go. He turned and left. The orange cat looked at Koth coldly and disappeared into the corridor with him. The broken restaurant regained its silence. Amidst the whining and screaming in the distance, the lonely old man stared at the empty soup bowl on the table and the spoon that had once been the only thing left of countless wealth. Respect. Imagine that you were once a pharaoh. The only agent of God in the world, the manifestation of the soul, the unique God of the human world, and all the glory in the world belonged to you, at least the glory of Egypt belonged to you. Your glory and greatness are everywhere in the vast land of Africa. In front of you, people bow their heads, lick your toes in awe, and experience the greatness of your divine might and grace. Until one day, a slut, a whore, suddenly received the favor of those capricious gods, and this favor was even more than what you received. Then you lose your power, your honor, your strength, and everything else. He had even almost lost his precious life in the so-called snake worship, falling into the dust. He was expelled from the country and territory that had once proclaimed how great he was. He was forced to wander in the mud and dust, and had no choice but to live in the same room with those lowly people who reeked of stench. In order to regain power, you have no choice but to sit in the same boat as those sneaky people who were once worthless in front of him. These were all sacrifices. In order to achieve a goal, in order to become great again, a little sacrifice needed to be made. If he could get what he wanted, everything he had lost now would be insignificant. But now, those lowly commoners are actually asking you to work together with them? Even asking for respect from you? Respect? 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 Amon Messiah strolled in the corridor covered in blood and muttered to himself. It was hard to tell whether his expression was ferocious or mocking. An old ghost who is about to die of old age dares to mention this word to me? How dare you? The wolf who had lost control roared and pounced forward. Then, it was torn apart by the Sphinx's sharp claws. In the end, it was swallowed into his stomach. He chewed it into pieces, tasted it, and spat it on the ground in disgust. Meow. The orange cat, who had long lost its intelligence, turned around and made a sorrowful sound to the pharaoh. Amon Messiah was stunned for a moment, and his expression became more and more distorted. His guard, his mount, his symbiote, had been reduced to the extent of having to swallow such a damn thing. Just like him. They were all losers who had long been abandoned by this world. Don't eat these anymore, Sphinx. He bent down and gently picked it up from the ground, stroking its fur. I promise, my dear, we will rise again. Meow. The Sphinx meowed, seemingly understanding. Amon Messiah pursed his lips, continued forward, and returned to his cabin. As a noble pharaoh, even the white-crowned king would give him preferential treatment. For example, this luxurious guest room was different from the narrow warehouses of other pariahs. It had a wide bed and a wine cabinet with soft light. Back in the room, the Sphinx ran to its food bowl and began to chew the fresh meat in it happily. Respect, Amon Messiah still could not forget the humiliation he had suffered. He drank the wine soaked in wormwood, put the cup back to its original place, and sat on the chair. One day, Kostre, one day, he murmured hoarsely. You and your bitch will understand what respect is. I don't think you will live to see that day. A hoarse voice sounded. Amon Messiah suddenly raised his head and looked in the direction of the voice. He saw the figure who pushed the door open and entered. As if he was seriously ill, he staggered forward, and foul-smelling corpse water dripped from his cloak. He reached out and picked up a bottle of wine from the wine cabinet. After breaking the bottle, he poured it into his mouth under the hood. The wine dripped from the corner of his mouth or from the hole in his abdomen. It mixed with the rancid liquid and dripped onto the soft carpet, dyeing a large gray stain. How dare you? Amon Messiah's eyes widened. Without his instructions, the Sphinx jumped up and tore the madman who dared to trespass the pharaoh's bedroom into pieces. The broken limbs fell to the ground, and maggots surged in the rotting flesh. But then, the Sphinx's expression changed. As if in extreme pain, it convulsed in pain and suddenly opened its mouth to vomit, but nothing came out. It could only scream in pain. The sound of chewing could be heard coming from the stomach. Crunch, 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 the crazy beast endured the intense pain and rolled violently, turning the entire luxurious room into a mess. But not long after, it stopped moving. Only the skin on its abdomen slowly bulged. It was torn apart from the inside out. A ferocious face that had been corroded to the bone was revealed. "This head can't be used anymore," the ferocious face grinned at the pharaoh. In front of his chest, a large mouth slowly opened and greedily gnawed at the Sphinx's limbs. Inch by inch, the Sphinx's blood, which contained a thin amount of divinity, corroded his body with a sizzling sound. It ate happily and enjoyed its dinner. It let out a hoarse moan in the intense pain, and then swallowed happily. And the three different heads stared blankly at the stiff pharaoh. "What the hell is this?" At that moment, Amon Messiah let out a groan of despair. Yin, 20 years old, intern inspector of the Astronomy Association. He liked singing, dancing, and probably. Maybe he didn't like any of them, who knew? Anyway, the only thing Huaisher knew was that when he fought, he really looked like a noob. What was it again? In short, noob was right. In esports, noobs are the original sin. Huaisher flew up and kicked the knife in his hand away. Then, he swung his axe and chopped down on his head. In an instant, bone and flesh separated, and one of Yin Yan's arms flew into the air. 2 seconds ago, when Ai Qing gave the order, the traitor Huaisher, who was already prepared, launched a backstab. Don't ask why. If you ask, you're a traitor. He raised his hand and fired 3 arrows in succession. At such a close distance, within 10 steps, the silver arrows would arrive in an instant, but Yin Yan was actually able to dodge. He really was a traitor. Huaisher was furious. "You're exposed now, aren't you? If you didn't have a guilty conscience, why would you be so wary of me?" Even if he dodged, there was no chance. Even if he dodged the 2 arrows at the back, he couldn't dodge the first one. It directly pierced through his chest, leaving a scorched mark. Yin Yan rolled on the ground and screamed in pain. Then, he turned invisible and disappeared without a trace. Then, Huaisher saw a charred scar floating in the air, charging straight at him. Then, the tragic scene just now happened. It was a complete beating. Even without relying on the skills and experience in Van Helsing's memory, Huaisher was beaten back to his original form, and he could still easily make 81 poses with this thing. "Speaking of which, why did you want to cut him?" Huaisher asked belatedly. "Because he has a guilty conscience." Ai Qing sneered. "Ignoring the flaws, in other words, this brother of mine, if he had any good things since he was young, he would definitely hide them well. How could he share them? What if I cut the wrong person? Then I'll cut the wrong person," Ai Qing said coldly. "Anyway, I'm going to cut him down anyway. It's just a little earlier. We won't lose out if we can get the crew list." "Why are all of you tactical players so dirty?" Huaisher sighed in his heart and became even more ruthless. After swinging his axe, his left hand pulled out a dagger from his waist and rushed forward with a horizontal sweep. Yin Yan rolled on the ground and crawled into the corridor. F***ck, how long are you going to watch? Following Yin Yan's scream, hoarse whispers and roars suddenly sounded in the quiet corridor and the quiet rooms on both sides. Dozens of rampagers in wolf form rushed out from behind the fragile door panels and rushed toward Huaisher. "You want to run after offending the demon hunters?" Huaisher raised his hand and fired 3 more crossbow bolts. It was unknown whether they hit their targets, but a wolf form was already rushing toward him. "Get lost." The axe fell and chopped a dog's head into pieces. Huaisher kicked the ghost that was still alive and kicking to the side. Then, another rampager pounced on him. In the blink of an eye, the corridor was filled with people. They were all opponents. Die. Huai Shi held a dagger in his left hand and an axe in his right. With a roar, he turned around and ran. Chapter 142. Go to Hell. Huai Shi held the blade in his left hand and the axe in his right hand. He roared and then turned around and ran. What else could he do? What was he doing? More than a dozen dark creatures had transformed into uncontrollable wolves, which meant more than a dozen fearless Tier 2 and Tier 3 sublimators. Not to mention their exquisite techniques, even a single claw from each of them would not be enough. I can't chat with you guys, so I'm running away. They probably didn't expect Huai Shi to be so spineless as to turn around and run. The group of wolves who were waiting for him were stunned. By the time they reacted, Huai Shi had already run 39 meters away. They couldn't take out the 40-meter blade, so they could only desperately chase after him. When they reached the dead end of the corridor, Huai Shi was nowhere to be seen. They couldn't find any trace of him in the ventilation duct. Only the cold sea breeze blew in from the smashed porthole. When Huai Shi climbed up to the deck from the stern, he was already panting. Running on water required too much explosive power. Even he didn't dare to try it often. Now the ship's speed was extraordinarily fast. Although there was no reference, Huai Shi was almost left behind by the cruise ship. Fortunately, she managed to grab hold of the ladder. Otherwise, she would have sunk into the sea alone. Recalling the situation just now, he finally concluded that Lei Feizhou and Yin Yen had colluded. That's right. Maybe his performance in the kitchen was to gain our trust. But it's meaningless to dwell on this. After all, the result can't be changed. Now they are all enemies. And Ai Qing paused and sighed. Yin Yen came to find you, which means they have already been to your room. Huai Shi was stunned for a long time before he finally reacted. You mean Lily? Yes. Ai Qing nodded in pity. I'm afraid it's a disaster. Huai Shi cursed in a low voice, and his expression became ferocious. Clenching the axe, he slowly got up, took the last tube of blood and poured it into his mouth. He felt the nausea and pleasure in his chest, and his eyes were bloodshot. What do you plan to do? I've had enough of these traitors. Huai Shi grinned and sighed, revealing his sharp canine teeth. Forget about Paracelsus. Let's kill these bastards first. Since everyone already knew that a crow was a crow and a wild boar was a wild boar. Then let's see who's the blackest. When Huai Shi followed the rope back to his room, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. The fluke in the depths of his heart had completely disappeared. Amidst the mess, he saw the blood on the ground with a familiar aura. The broken limbs were thrown to the ground in pieces. Huai Shi looked at the arm that had fallen beside his feet. Her slender hand was still holding onto the thick dictionary. Unfortunately, the pages of the dictionary were soaked in blood and were about to melt. Huai Shi bent down and carefully picked up the dictionary. She closed it and put it away in her bosom. He raised his head and looked ahead expressionlessly. He saw the person sitting next to the corpse. This is an accident. He stared at Lei Feizhou's face. I thought you would be hiding somewhere that I couldn't find. Before you came back, I was actually thinking, in the pool of blood. The bearded man raised his eyes and glanced at him. He kicked the broken corpse at his feet. I wouldn't have been tricked by a double body this time, right? This is the bad thing about scholars. It's hard to tell if she's really dead or not. He paused and slowly raised his head. The corners of his eyes were slightly raised. But looking at you, she should really be dead. Huai Shi was silent. He didn't say anything. He just pulled out his dagger and axed. He moved his neck slightly, making a cracking sound. Have you eaten? He suddenly asked. I've been holding back since I boarded the ship. I just had a satisfying meal. Lei Feizhou laughed. How about you? I only drank some water. I'm half full. Huai Shi sighed softly. Seeing you eat so happily. I'm hungry too. Vampire's canine teeth suddenly popped out from his parted lip. At that moment, Huai Shi disappeared from where he was. Forward! Bang! Lei Feizhou's pupils dilated. He took a step back, surprised by Huai Shi's terrifying speed. The brass knuckles in his hand cracked under the chop of the axe blade. But before he could react, another blade light burst out from Huai Shi's left hand. The axe blade was just an auxiliary. The real killing move came from the assassination knife technique of the Inquisition. Without any warning, Huai Shi's arm seemed to have no bones. After disappearing into her sleeves, it popped out from her collar and turned into a venomous snake. The venomous fangs of steel whizzed out. In the sharp sound of metal friction, Lei Feizhou's whole mouth was split open, as if it had doubled in size out of thin air. A forked tongue flew out from the open mouth. In a single exchange, his head was almost sliced in half by Huai Shi's blade. But then, he clenched Huai Shi's arm that was holding the knife. His big, ferocious mouth that was split open curled up, as if he was smiling. A wolf-like roar came out from between the teeth. In an instant, the deck on both sides of the room and above the head was broken. The wolf shifters hidden in it tore the steel apart. Following the order of the wolf's howl, they attacked Huai Shi, who had no way to dodge. "You can't move, can you?" Lei Feizhou laughed hoarsely. This was the death trap he had prepared for his teammate. "Who said so?" Huai Shi, who was close at hand, asked. A crisp sound suddenly came from the left elbow he was holding. It was dislocated. The moment his elbow was dislocated, Huai Shi jumped up. After getting rid of the limitation of the bones, he went against common sense and threw himself into the air, falling behind Lei Feizhou. In midair, he aimed his arm at Lei Feizhou's head and pulled the trigger with his pinky finger. Under his sleeve, 3 demon-piercing crossbow bolts whistled out. As Lei Feizhou hastily dodged, an arrow pierced through his neck in an instant. 2 more arrows completely smashed his rotten face into smithereens. The blessed pure silver couldn't do anything to the lichen with the thin god's blood inheritance, but the poison smeared on it corroded the wound, making sizzling sounds. Amidst the severe pain, Lei Feizhou roared. His 5 blade-like fingers grabbed at Huai Shi in the air, but grabbed nothing. Like a gymnast who came to participate in the Olympics, he completely used Lei Feizhou as a horizontal bar and began to show off his fancy move. In the air, Huai Shi circled around, using his rope-like arm to swing back and forth. He looked for a fulcrum on Lei Feizhou's body, and his speed was unbelievably fast. Those wolf shifters who flew over seemed to have never seen such a fancy move. For a moment, they couldn't catch him, and the axe in his hand chopped down at Lei Feizhou's head. "Go to hell! In your dreams!" Lei Feizhou roared. He raised his right hand and grabbed at Huai Shi's axe blade that was chopping down. The collision of iron and bone burst out a resounding cry. Blood spurted out. Even a lichen couldn't compare the hardness of his body with an axe. With one blow, Lei Feizhou's thumb was cut off. But the remaining 4 fingers suddenly closed together and clamped the axe blade together with his palm, like an iron clamp. Then Lei Feizhou roared, "Come down!" Grabbing Huai Shi's arm and axe with both hands, he pulled Huai Shi and suddenly smashed him to the ground. The wind whistled. But in midair, Huai Shi had already let go of his hand holding the axe handle. His whole body floated to the left and suddenly kicked a wolf shifter's face. Lei Feizhou's strength and Huai Shi's real weight after removing the divine mark. Bang! In an instant, the sound of bones breaking was heard. A head flew backward from the neck and hung on the back of the wolf shifter. And the wolf shifter didn't even have time to react to what had happened. He was sent flying by this sudden burst of strength. Finally, his whole body was stuck in the porthole that Huai Shi had smashed. His 2 legs kicked hard, but he couldn't climb out at all. And Huai Shi had already taken advantage of this short gap to pull out a test tube from the medicine bag at his waist and smashed it on the ground with all his might. In an instant, silver mist suddenly gushed out, expanded, and shrouded everything. the last silver nitrate. Not only did the rising fog cover everyone's eyes, it even corroded Feijo's exposed skin, causing him to feel a sharp pain. Then, he felt that his hand was empty. Huai Shi had broken free from his restraint. He disappeared into the thick mist. At that moment, he heard a sneer in his ear, and a shuddering whisper, "Hallelujah!" The next moment, the sound of steel whistling suddenly burst out. Just like Feijo's terrifying contagious wolf venom, Yin Yan's terrifying degree of stealth, and Yu Jun's 2 lives, every character selected as an investigator seemed to have their own unique specialties and characteristics. For example, Van Helsing, 31 years old, was a vampire, a professional demon hunter. Or to put it more seriously, he was the judge with the most merits among all the Holy Spirit vampires. He was the most outstanding consumable among the demon hunters that the Church had cultivated for decades. A vampire killer who sucked blood, a dark creature who mingled among the dark creatures, and a person who was allowed to clean up the fallen creatures, an executioner who fed on his own kind. In other words, in the turbulent silver mist, Huai Shi grinned and smiled silently, a traitor who specializes in killing his own people. Bang! With a pull of his pinky, a demon-piercing crossbow arrow flew out and pierced through the head of a rampager in wolf form, nailing him to the wall. Huai Shi stepped forward and slashed down with the axe in his hand. The crisp sound of limbs being torn apart came from the silver mist. Darkness was sometimes the shelter of dark creatures. Many types of stigmata had the ability to see in the dark, just like ghosts. But only this mist, which was a mixture of a large amount of alchemy potions and pure silver, was a dark curtain that no talent could see through. Including Huai Shi. Even the pure silver here was highly toxic to him. He couldn't even breathe in here. But he seemed to be used to it, in the countless trainings in Van Helsing's memory. So, he became silent like a ghost, patiently and cautiously looking for his prey in this turbulent silver mist. Relying on the sound of heartbeats, whispers, and the friction of clothes, he unhurriedly cut off the dark creatures one by one. Just like what he had done countless times before. If Feijo thought that he was fearless because he had a large number of wolves, then he would now know how wrong he was. When wolves and hunters were in the same room, the hunt had already begun. Chapter 143. To want world peace, to want humans to unite, to want a beautiful future, or to let justice prevail forever. Compared to such extravagant wishes, killing something was actually a very simple matter. That was because life was originally so fragile. Before reaching the legendary level of rank 4 Starin, all living things were mortals. No matter what kind of miracle incarnation or what kind of person ascended, once their throat was slit and their heart pierced, death was only a matter of course. In other words, if the result could be obtained by destroying something, then it was far simpler than creating something worth longing for. This was what the so-called killing was all about. A shortcut, a universal solution. Even if it wasn't the best choice, it could always solve the urgent situation and allow the terrible loss of self-control to be pacified, allowing a chaotic matter to be resolved cleanly. If one wanted to slack off and pursue the cost-performance ratio, there was nothing more suitable than this method. Thus, the stake, the Inquisition, and even the judge were born. From the first day of their birth, they had been meticulously thinking about how to clean up, sweep away, and even slaughter heresies in the most efficient way. Through 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration, they had created a tool like Van Helsing. They had invoked the Genesis Codex of the Holy Bible's chapter of Genesis and extracted the legend of the vampire to create this heresy that belonged to us, a monster that was allowed to temporarily exist under the light. They had imparted inconceivable killing techniques and undefiable commandments, imposed unforgivable sins and indelible piety, and finally obtained great achievements that couldn't be ignored and a dark history that couldn't exist. I know your actions. You are hard-working, persevering, and abhor evil. You have once detected those fake apostles and exposed their masks. A hoarse whisper came from the pale white fog. Immediately after, the color of blood burst forth, dyeing the lingering white fog a wisp of mournful red. Amidst the wolf's roar, a fleeting figure moved forward, slashing down the knife and axe in his hands as he whispered softly, "I know your actions. You only have the false reputation of being alive, but in reality, you are dead." Huai Shi stepped forward, feeling the madness and rage burning in his chest. He raised his scarlet eyes and swept his short knife horizontally, chopping off the head in front of him. "You must repent, and remember the lessons you have received and heard before, and keep them. If you don't wake up, I will be like a nightmare, suddenly appearing when you least expect it." In this way, he preached to the dead. This was the final divine sermon. There was no need to deliberately seek it. It was so natural that it was as smooth as breathing, as if it did not exist. He was clearly a cold-blooded creature, but under Silver's agitation, his surging blood seemed to be boiling, igniting and burning him. He moved through the fog of death, creating even more death. Following the howls of the wolves, more and more wolf shapeshifters gathered and charged into the fog. However, Lei Feizhou staggered back and used all his strength to pull out the arrow nailed to his neck. It was unknown whether it was pain or hatred, but the broken face became even more ferocious. But even though the arrow was pulled out, the wound didn't heal as expected. He didn't even feel any pain, only cold numbness. It was completely necrotic. This was a lethality that even lichens with divine bloodlines couldn't repair. "What kind of poison is this?" "It's chocolate." Someone looked at his faintly wolf face and whispered in his ear, "I smeared chocolate on the knife." Lei Feizhou turned his head in horror, but he saw the black shadow that ignored gravity and hung upside down on the ceiling, as well as the axe blade that was raised from the bottom to the top toward his face. On the dark green blade of the axe, there was a sweet fragrance that seeped into the heart. Lei Feizhou subconsciously leaned back. Then, iron and bone collided, creating sparks from the friction. Cracks crisscrossed, chiseling an inverted cross symbol on Lei Feizhou's face. Blood spurted out. Before he could react, the black shadow swung a short knife from mid-air and pierced into Lei Feizhou's lungs. With a twist of the wrist, the roar that was brewing inside was torn apart. The pair of blood-stained eyes appeared in front of Lei Feizhou again, burning with fire. The whistling of the wind finally rose from Huai Shi's hand. He raised the heavy axe blade above his head and chopped down on Lei Feizhou's face again. At the last moment, Lei Feizhou only had time to crush the amulet on his neck. Bang! The axe blade created sparks from the friction between the pitch-black fingers. It had been blocked. Sharp fingernails popped out of Lei Feizhou's fingers, instantly turning pitch-black like the edge of a blade. New bones, flesh, and dark hair also grew out of the mutilated palm in an instant. With a hoarse roar, Lei Feizhou's body rose little by little. The bones in his head made a sound like steel being twisted. His nose extended and his eye sockets sunk. In the blink of an eye, his former disguise revealed the nature of a lichen. Between the tangled strands of hair, there was suddenly a faint electric light bursting forth. With just a wave of his hand, he left a dazzling afterimage in the air, tearing apart the obstructing cabin planks as if they were thin paper. The narrow room fell apart in an instant. Even the silver mist was blown away by the fierce wind stirred up by the lightning, revealing a scene of bloody devastation and wreckage. The other hand, which was several times thicker, smashed toward Huai Shi's face with a roar. The fist wrapped in lightning hit the handle of the axe, sending Huai Shi flying. He smashed into the wall, almost throwing him out of the cabin and into the sea. Feeling the numbness in his arm, Huai Shi gasped violently. He raised his head and stared at the unrecognizable Lei Feizhou. "This disguise is not bad. You should have taken it out earlier." The wolf's face became more and more distorted. Obviously, this state was not something he could casually take out and use as he pleased. The gods' gifts were limited, and they would never allow their servants to squander them wantonly. But once taken out, it was enough to change the situation of the battle. Now, with his roar, the wolf shifters in the corridor tore apart the walls and rushed into the cabin. They had completely surrounded the place, and the mist they used to hide in had disappeared without a trace. Le Faygeau sneered. "I have to say you missed the last chance to escape. You're mistaken about one thing." Huai Shi smeared the poisonous sword oil on the axe again and calmly replied, "I've never thought of escaping." Le Faygeau was stunned for a moment. Then, he couldn't help but laugh mockingly. "Just for an NPC? An NPC? Just an NPC?" Huai Shi lowered his head and looked at the blood-stained dictionary in his arms. He didn't answer. He actually had a lot to say. He wanted to tell the supervisor behind Le Faygeau, "Many people are like you. After becoming a sublimator, they treat everything as a luxurious game, even if we don't live in the game. They would make a mess of everything without any scruples or respect. They would do whatever they wanted and leave a mess on the ground. Then, they would smile and say to you, 'Relax, this is just a game. I don't intend to hurt you. You're just an NPC.' But for those who died because of this was not a game. Death was real. It was cruel, sad, and disgusting. No matter how many times they experienced it, it wouldn't change. It shouldn't be something that could be smoothed over with a light excuse and reason. But in the end, it was meaningless to say these things. Weak words alone could never convince anyone. Otherwise, why would the Inquisition exist, and why would something like Van Helsing be created? For some reason, Huai Shi suddenly thought of the village in the records again. There were also the dead old people, women, and children, those stooped bodies that had lost their warmth lying in a pool of blood. Their empty eyes reflected the barren world. They died silently in an insignificant struggle 60 years ago, like weeds. No one knew and no one remembered, except for Huai Shi himself. So, he clenched his axe and replied softly, "Yes, just for an NPC. I now believe what Yin said. You really aren't AI Qing." The supervisor behind Le Faygeau sneered. "At least, she won't be as stupid as you." "Is that so? Maybe you haven't seen how she looks when she's angry?" Huai Shi stared calmly at the Lekan. "Separated by many rampagers who had transformed into wolves," he said, "but no matter what, I have to thank you. Thank you for reminding me again how powerless I am when I can't even save an NPC." At that moment, the knife and axe collided in Huai Shi's hands. The demon hunter raised his blood-red eyes, grinned, and showed the same ferocious canine teeth to the beasts. "Come!" He took a step forward. Amid the bursting sparks, the sound of steel rang out. The knife and axe slashed. The taut bowstring broke at this moment. The brief calm was broken, as if the surface of ice had cracked, and a monstrous turbid wave burst out amidst the loud roar. As the wolf shifter roared, blood spurted out from the blade of the axe and dyed the pale face red. He took a second step forward amidst the surging rampagers. Ignoring the torn wound on his back, Huai Shi raised his axe and slashed again. The bones and flesh were torn apart, and the broken head and limbs flew into the air. Immediately after, the dagger stabbed forward and pierced the throat. He swung it horizontally, and blood splattered everywhere. Countless blue and purple blood vessels appeared on the neck and extended upward, covering Huai Shi's face like layers of spider silk. Blood mixed with silver and various alchemy potions had already been injected into his pulse through the needle under his sleeve, bringing him endless pain and strength. It was like drinking poison to quench thirst. But his consciousness became extremely calm, like ice iron thrown into the deep sea. He brandished the saber and axe in his hands, drawing out complicated arcs and sketching out traces of blood in the blink of an eye. Huai Shi raised his hand and shot the last arrow behind him. Ignoring the guy who was nailed to the wall, he opened his mouth and bit the throat of a wolf shifter, sucking the blood that represented life. Then, he tore his throat and dealt a fatal blow with the blade of the axe. The wolf poison mixed in the blood flowed in his body, but it was killed by the poison in his blood. He was moving forward. Besieged by blood and death, he roared. Chapter 144. Lei Feijo heard Huai Shi's roar, but he only sneered and remained unmoved. He raised his voice and roared, urging the wolf shapeshifters to come forward and completely drown him. But this time, Huai Shi didn't give him time to give orders. It was like a bird flying in the sky. It reversed gravity in an instant. The thin figure in the pack of wolves leaped up, cracks spreading from the floor under his feet. He was already high in the air, galloping over the whole riddled cabin wall. In an instant, whether it was the chaotic wolf shapeshifters, the broken walls, or the collapsed ceiling, they all became his temporary foothold. He didn't even cause the slightest sound. Lei Feijo was stunned for a moment. When the vampire's terrifying agility was displayed in such a way, the wolf pack's strategy of attrition had lost its meaning, and the black figure in the blood was already close at hand. Naive. The Lycan sneered. In the burst of lightning, the axe blade and the sharp claws collided again. The numbness spread, and Huai Shi's movements paused for a moment. But then, he saw Lei Feijo's arm waving, and the sharp blade in his left hand swept across his face. Even if he raised his arm to block in front of him, he still felt the pain of his bones and flesh being broken. He flew backwards, and his left arm had already been torn open with several terrible wounds. Amidst the surging blood, his pale blue bones could be seen. Before he landed, the wounds were forcibly healed under the stimulation of alchemy blood. And in his right hand, the axe blade had already left his hand and flew into the air. Without waiting for Lei Feijo to withdraw his gaze from the whirling axe blade, a dagger slipped out of his right sleeve. He held it tightly with 5 fingers and stabbed it with a backhand. In an instant, it pierced through the bursting lightning and nailed into his face. It was understandable that when your nose bridge was too long, there would always be people who wanted to use it to make a fuss. But it was unacceptable. The Lycan roared. The moment Huai Shi landed, he let go of his hand, staggered back, and caught the axe handle falling from the air. Ignoring the wolf pack behind him, he rushed forward again. This time, the hunter and the Lycan collided. The blade of the axe and the sharp claws rubbed against each other, emitting the roar of steel colliding. The Lycan roared in anger. Amidst the deafening roar, his mutated body expanded once again. He actually managed to push Huai Shi back a step. Then, he gripped the axe and the blade in his hands and unleashed his power once again. Huai Shi was no longer able to stand firm under the pressure of a force that was several times stronger than his own. He was suddenly pulled up and smashed into the wall again. He didn't even have time to slide down from the deck before he saw the huge Lycan crouch on the ground, its heavy body charging towards him like a cannonball. In an instant, the twisted cabin wall behind Huai Shi was shattered. Huai Shi only felt darkness in front of his eyes as Lei Feijo pushed him into the next room. That enormous power did not stop, and continued to rumble forward. Immediately after, another layer of the cabin wall was shattered under the impact. Huai Shi opened his mouth and spat out pieces of his internal organs and clotted blood, which fell to the ground with a sizzling sound. The lightning that twined around Lei Feijo's body almost pierced through his entire body. But Lei Feijo didn't have it easy either. Even if he didn't have any strength, Huai Shi could at least move his little finger, especially when it was aimed at his eye socket. The last blessed bolt shot out from the broken crossbow mechanism pierced deeply into his left eye, leaving only a short section of the end. Blood flowed like a stream. Lei Feijo roared, stretched out his hand, and pulled Huai Shi up with his sharp claws. He grabbed him by the neck and lifted him up. But at that moment, he didn't know why, but his hands went soft. It was as if he was having a cramp. The numbness came suddenly and disappeared as quickly as it appeared. It was so short that it seemed like it didn't happen at all. But it was also so abnormal. In the reflection of the broken porthole, he seemed to see a familiar shadow flashing behind him, like a ghost. Someone was standing behind him. Who's there? He turned his head subconsciously. But he didn't see anything. Then, he felt a sharp pain coming from his neck. At the moment when he was sluggish, Huaishur broke free from the restraint and looked at Lei Feijuo's exposed neck. Under the cover of the lightning, it was like a duck's neck under the spotlight. He grinned, revealing his sharp canine teeth. "It's time to eat." Then, the lichen roared in pain. When the vampire's sharp canine teeth pierced his neck, it was followed by a dizziness, which came from the toxin on the vampire's teeth. But then, the canine teeth seemed to have turned into red-hot iron nails, bringing bursts of burning pain. The pure silver holy words embedded in the canine teeth were frantically purifying everything. Whether it was him or Huaishur himself. But what terrified him was that the lightning that he could control as if it was part of his body was quickly dissipating. Along with his atavistic wolf state, the blessings bestowed by the gods were being consumed at a rate dozens of times faster than expected. No, it should be said that it was being taken away. As the blood was absorbed, this power flowed into Huaishur's body and was digested into the pure essence of life. Wasn't the essence of the vampire's stigmata to take away the victim's life, power, and even everything through the blood as a medium? Even if the blood that carried the dense lightning light burned his face until it sizzled, soon after the charred surface peeled off, pale flesh and skin would be reborn. "Get away from me!" Lei Feijuo struggled hard, exhausted all his strength, and finally pulled Huaishur off his body. However, there was a huge wound on his neck. Even his aorta was torn, and blood was constantly gushing out. He staggered back. Before he could stand firm, he saw Huaishur, who had rolled on the ground, get up again, dragging the axe on the ground, and walk toward him step by step. Lei Feijuo let out a hoarse scream. The wolf shifters surrounded him, giving him a short respite. After half a minute, the lichen used the last trace of lightning to dispel the silver curse on the wound and closed the fatal wound on the aorta. However, the blessed divine state had already ended, much earlier than expected. However, compared to him, Huaishur's situation was more tragic. Even though he was replenished with blood, there were still many wounds on his body. The purple spider web spots on his face became more serious. The poison had seeped into his bone marrow. He tried his best to breathe. "Too naive, little brat, too naive." Lei Feijuo looked at the vampire who was surrounded and laughed hoarsely. "Even if you kill me, can that NPC girl come back? What you're doing is meaningless. You're just digging your own grave." "Maybe." Huaishur looked up expressionlessly and threw out a flying knife from the chaotic battle, leaving a gap in his smile. "But someone has to pay the price for this, right?" Lei Feijuo's smile gradually became gloomy. He let out a long scream. Huaishur was faster than him. After tearing off the empty blood bag, the vampire mustered up his remaining strength. The knife and axe in his hand swept through the air and chopped off the head of the former wolf shifter. Stepping on the corpse that had yet to fall to the ground, he rose into the air again like a ghost and silently approached Lei Feijuo. This time, Lei Feijuo didn't try to resist. Instead, he took a few steps back to avoid the sharp edge. After losing the ancestral state of being blessed by the gods, he didn't dare to confront the horrifying lethality of the vampire. Instead, he roared and ordered the rampagers wandering on the cruise ship to gather. But this time, there wasn't much response. Ear-piercing roars sounded one after another from the front and back of the cruise ship. Thick smoke constantly spread out, forming a poisonous cloud. No, it should be called an antidote. Under the shroud of the smoke, those crazy rampagers stiffened for a moment. Then, under the powerful tranquilizer and the cold mist created to counter the wolfbane, everything was swallowed up. It wasn't a gentle healing, but a cruel killing. The ultra-low temperature environment and fierce poison created purely to counter the characteristics of the wolfbane gradually corroded all infected tissues into a pile of rotten meat. Even the rest of the wolf shifter who wasn't covered by the cold mist gradually stiffened. Their movements became slow and weak, as if they had degenerated into an ordinary version of zombies. In just a short hour, the terrifying plague that once ravaged the entire ship began to rapidly fade under the effect of such exquisite and huge alchemy. Paracelsus, after hiding for so long, he finally made his move. But Huaishur just glanced at it and then withdrew his gaze without interest. Instead, he focused on the stunned Lei Feizhou in front of him and reminded him with a smile. "Now, it's your turn." Lei Feizhou's expression suddenly changed, and he quickly retreated. "Yin Yan, you won't be able to recover if I die." A bunch of idiot." In the shadows in the distance, Yin Yan couldn't help but sneer when he heard the call of his ally. One was a boorish man who began to become arrogant after gaining power, and the other was an idiot who couldn't distinguish priorities. With a slight shift in the middle, they would start to bite each other. But no matter what, once Lei Feizhou died, Huaishur would become difficult to control. With a demon hunter who was proficient in tracking on the ship, Yin Yan didn't have the confidence to hide until the end. Although he hoped that both sides could perish together, now it seemed that he had to help. He pressed the wound on his chest that had finally healed, and a trace of ruthlessness flashed in his eyes. Under the silent sneak, he carefully bypassed the pool of blood on the ground that would reveal his traces. He quietly mixed in with the group of weakened rampagers and sneaked toward Huaishur's back. According to the legends, these mixed-blood dwarves and goblins who wandered in the Scottish Highlands became cruel and tyrannical because of their discriminated origins. They liked to rely on their invisible iron boots to run in the dark, and use their cruel iron claws or iron spears to kill passers-by from behind. They used the blood of passers-by to dye their bonnets red. Therefore, they were called the Red Hat. Now, Yin Yan had finally completely digested the Red Hat's memory of sneaking around. He was 100,000 times more skilled than when he first started, and he didn't leave any trace at all. But just as he raised his poisoned short spear and was about to retaliate, he saw Huaishur suddenly turn around and smile gently at him. Was he discovered? The next moment the axe fell from the sky. He retreated awkwardly, and then saw the bright light of the dagger, which cut a wound on his face and almost cut his neck. Yin Yan came out of hiding in a sorry state. He couldn't believe it. Then, he heard Huaishur's cold voice. "Next time you want to sneak around, remove the smell of your old lover's perfume first." Yin Yan's expression was ferocious. He held the short spear with one arm and was about to turn around and call the Lekan to kill Huaishur together. But he saw that Lei Feizhou had retreated to the end of the corridor. While Huaishur was distracted by Yin Yan, he turned around and ran away. He ran away. He was stunned. He didn't expect Lei Feizhou to be so vicious. But looking at Huaishur, who was walking towards him step by step with his face covered in blood, his expression began to twitch. He quickly retreated. "I was deceived. It's all Lei Feizhou's doing." "Then get out of my way." Huaishur didn't wait for him to finish. She kicked him away, and with a swing of her axe, she chopped down the wolf shifters in front of her. She followed the trail of blood on the ground and chased after him. If Yin Yan was determined to hide and escape, he might not be able to stop him. But no matter what, Lei Feizhou must die. He pressed the blood-stained dictionary in his arms and spat a mouthful of black blood on the ground. In the sizzling sound, he dragged the axe and walked step by step in the direction of Lei Feizhou's escape. "Since you're already here, why are you leaving so quickly?" he whispered softly. In the chaos, Lei Feizhou heard the footsteps behind him. His expression became more and more ferocious. Being instigated by Yin Yan to immediately take action against Huaishur was a bad move. He should have gathered more people. No, if it weren't for someone interfering, Huaishur would have been doomed today. This was his mission. Before boarding the ship, when the old beggar handed the coin to Huaishur, he knew who his mission target was. But now, he was powerless to contend with Huaishur. If he relied on Yin Yan, that swindler, he would be sold even more miserably. He must save himself first, but no matter how fast he was, the staggering footsteps still followed closely behind him like a shadow, refusing to let go. In the hoarse gasps, there was the sound of the axe blade rubbing against the floor. A straight line was drawn on the ground. In the end, he was trapped in an empty room. Lefajo looked at the messy room, but couldn't find any other traces. His expression twitched. After a long time, he finally understood that he had been abandoned. It was as if he had abandoned Yin. He turned his head and looked at Huai Shi at the door. Huai Shi was also looking at him. "Wait a minute." Lefajo's expression changed. He said with a slight hope, "We're all on the same side. There's no reason to kill each other, right? If you kill me, the Holy Spirit genealogy won't let you go." "You're right." Huai Shi nodded. He wiped the blood on the dagger and sighed. "In fact, at the beginning, I didn't want to kill my teammates." In his pocket, the blood-stained Wanderer coin was burning fiercely, glowing like lava. The Archangel glared at him. The pain that seeped into his bone marrow burned his blood. "Unfortunately," Huai Shi said indifferently, "I was forced to do it. I still have value. I have important information to tell you." The corner of Lefajo's eyes twitched. He hurriedly said, "Yu Jun." "It's about Yu Jun's secret, and another person's secret. Spare my life, and I'll tell you everything. Also, don't you want to kill the pharaoh? I can help you. I still have a few uncontrollables. I can. Do you still remember what I said?" Huai Shi raised her pinky finger and dug at her bleeding ear. She raised her red face and looked at him. She repeated her words one by one. "Someone has to pay the price for this." He raised the handle of the axe and clenched it with both hands. The purple blood vessels pulsed painfully on his face, making his pale face look even more ferocious. "I think that now should be the time." Lefajo staggered back. But at that moment, Huai Shi stepped forward. As if he was shuttling through the darkness, he crossed a distance of several meters with one step. He appeared in front of Lefajo like a nightmare. The axe in his hand was already raised high, and he chopped down on the Leekan's neck. The time of judgment had arrived. A ferocious expression suddenly appeared on the Leekan's panicked face. He raised an arm to block the falling axe, but his left hand, which was hidden behind him, pulled out a dagger and stabbed toward Huai Shi's chest. It was hard to imagine that he actually had such skills. After waiting for a long time, the Leekan finally seized the only opportunity. The instantaneous piercing was so fast that lightning couldn't catch up. It was as if the process in between had been skipped. The moment he gripped the dagger had already pierced Huai Shi's heart and nailed itself to the dictionary left behind by Lily. Then, it got lost in the countless fragmentary annotations between the lines and stopped there. And Lefajo's arm had already been sent flying by Huai Shi's roar. Blood splattered. Then, the falling axe swung up along with the pulling of the arm and chopped off Lefajo's other arm. In the severe pain, Lefajo screamed and staggered back. Huai Shi stepped forward and swung the axe for the last time in the rain of blood. Chop! The iron light flashed. There was the sound of thin paper being torn. A head that still had the characteristics of a Leekan flew out from the splashing blood and fell into the pool of blood on the ground, along with his corpse. Silence arrived. Huai Shi staggered and bent down tiredly, trying to prop himself up with the axe handle. But the severe pain in his body had already taken away all his strength. He slid to the ground and saw the silver circuit on the back of his hand. Punishment for breaking an oath. The silver implanted in his bone marrow burned in anger, coldly ravaging each of his tiny nerves, turning the thousands of fragmentary pains into an unbearable torrent of pain, drowning him little by little, allowing him to slowly suffocate in the dark abyss. In a daze, Huai Shi reached out with difficulty and crawled on the ground, awkwardly drinking the blood flowing on the ground. But the blood that was once full of life couldn't bring him a trace of comfort in this hellish torment. At any cost, Van Helsing, at any cost. In the pain of thirst for blood and punishment, the archbishop's old voice rang in his ears again. Kill Paracelsus. Let the work of that blasphemer, let that deformed child who will only tarnish God's achievements, be smashed to pieces. Kill him! Kill him! The roars of countless people echoed in Huaishi's soul, almost tearing him to shreds. He opened his eyes with difficulty and wanted to crawl up, but all he could do was flip his body over. He saw the ghost that had staggered into the room. He didn't know how to describe it. It was like a roll of broken bandages wrapped around a mutilated corpse. Like a wild beast, it crawled on the ground with its mutilated limbs, following the smell of blood. Origin substance. Origin substance. Give me origin substance. Like a mad dog, it pounced on Le Faigeau's head that had rolled on the ground, its mutilated face chewing the flesh and blood on the head. Under the influence of the blood, its broken face seemed to have been moisturized and became radiant. One could actually vaguely make out the outline of the dark youth from before, as well as the noble pattern painted in light gold, but soon, it threw away the head that was already beyond recognition in disappointment. Not enough. Too little. Too little. Give me more. The former pharaoh slowly turned his head and looked at the vampire on the ground. His eyes seemed to be burning with the flames of lava as he slowly approached. Give me more. Huaishir reached out with difficulty, feeling for the position of the axe. But in the midst of the intense pain, he found that he couldn't even hold the handle. He could only helplessly smile bitterly. I'm closed. Can you go somewhere else to take a look? Origin substance. Lowly commoner, give me origin substance. The pharaoh roared and opened his mouth to bite his neck. Then, in the midst of a loud explosion, his head exploded into pieces. Dried fragments and broken bandages flew everywhere. Dust flew into Huaishir's mouth, causing him to cough violently. Even though his head had exploded, the pharaoh still didn't die. His mutilated body spasmed crazily. The body wrapped in bandages crawled on the ground, as if it wanted to escape. But then, the mutilated body was stepped on. Under the light of the halo above her head, the young girl raised the cup filled with holy water in her hand and prayed softly. The living know that they will die. A dead man knows nothing. They will no longer be rewarded, and their names will not be remembered. Their love, their hatred, and their jealousy have long been extinguished. In everything that they do under the sun, they will never be divided again. The holy water with a pure light sprinkled down. It landed on the mutilated body, like the sea washing over the beach, causing the mummy to collapse instantly and dissipate into dust. Then, Huaishir saw the exquisite patterns carved on the barrel of the old musket. And the young girl in front of him who should have been a corpse that hadn't even turned cold yet. Lily. She was still alive. What? Huaishir was stunned for a moment. He couldn't help but want to laugh and laugh at himself. Then my revenge, wasn't it for nothing? At that moment, Huaishir heard Ai Qing's sigh. As expected, he didn't die? She murmured unhappily. The worst guess had finally come true. Congratulations, Huaishir. You've finally found your mission target. No, it should be said that on the first day, Huaishir had found the mission target's body with his luck and intuition. However, he was misled by his self-righteous experience and fell into a blind spot. Now, other than her, who else on this ship was qualified to be called Paracelsus? Is it with you? I've been looking for it for a long time. Lily bent down and took the dictionary from the vampire's arms. Looking at the cracks and the blood-stained part, she couldn't help but shake her head. You are Paracelsus, right? Huaishir asked softly. When Le Faigeau wanted to kill me, you were also the one who helped me, right? As for my father, he passed away half a year ago. Lily squatted down, opened the bag on her waist, took out a glass syringe and needle, skillfully assembled it, and pierced the blood vessel on Huaishir's wrist. Unfortunately, if it was him, with this level of wolfsbane, he would only need a few minutes to make a special medicine, right? I still haven't learned enough. Along with the girl's words, the blood was slowly extracted and flowed into the syringe. But what was puzzling was that the blood quickly lost its color in the syringe. Countless dust-sized crystals constantly emerged from it, and then melted into the colorless blood. Only a gray sediment was left, slowly falling to the bottom. Lily pulled out the needle from the glass syringe in her hand and replaced it with a brand new one. Then, she skillfully pierced the blood vessel on the inner side of her wrist and extracted a part of the flowing blood. Then, Lily began to quickly flip through the pages, looking for the content and formula. So, more complicated changes that couldn't be seen by the naked eye emerged from the syringe. At this moment, the ordinary glass syringe seemed to have turned into a huge biological laboratory. In the blink of an eye, a series of complicated processes such as centrifugal extraction, sterilization and inactivation, cell cultivation, and cell membrane fusion were completed. The so-called scholar was such a strange profession. People without talent couldn't get started in their lifetime. This was an amusement park only for geniuses. As long as one grasped the law and carried the relevant instruments and raw materials, they could complete the results that required a long time and precise operation in the laboratory in an instant. All the redundant intermediate steps were completely omitted. Soon, the blood in the syringe turned green. With Lily's movements, it was re-injected into Huaishi's blood vessel. A wave of dizziness and sleepiness emerged from Huaishi's consciousness. He gradually lost the perception and control of his limbs, and it was difficult to maintain consciousness. What is this? Is it poison? Oh? You mean the recombinant fusion protein of cytokines? Lily calmly replied, You have been poisoned too much. Those inferior alchemy potions are purely slow killing. Except for the special targeted drugs, simple antidotes won't work at all. Although the side effect is that you will sleep for a long time, but Huaishir couldn't hear the rest of the words. He closed his eyes and fell into a deep sleep. After Lily patiently explained, she heard him snoring. She frowned a little unhappily, but in the end she didn't wake him up again. She lowered her head and looked at the all-purpose dictionary that her father had left her. After a long time, she turned to the last page and saw the last words that Paracelsus left for her. There was another completely different note. Friend, a trustworthy person who will not betray you. A trustworthy person? She looked down at Huaishir for a long time and laughed softly. Then sleep well, my friend. Chapter 145. This time, he didn't just close his eyes and open them again. The night passed quickly. Huaishir felt as if he really had fallen asleep. He was immersed in the pain of origin substance splitting apart. The pain brought about by the penalty of breaking an oath still lingered in his body. Even in the countless fragments of broken dreams, it was still so clear. It even shattered his connected consciousness, like a piece of iron being struck by a hammer on an iron felt. The flames of pain were reforged to ensure that this sharp tool could continue to complete its mission. But to Huaishir, it was an unavoidable torture. His consciousness endured the ravages of pain every moment until he finally forgot who he was in a daze and was immersed in those fragmented memories. In the end, he could only hear countless solemn voices echoing in the darkness. Abraham, today your hands have been stained with the blood of injustice. This will be the proof of your atonement, and also a part of your sins. You have dirted your hands, preventing more hands from touching the darkness. You have shouldered your sins, allowing more souls to step onto the stairs to heaven. If your sins are not allowed, your redemption will be far away. What has already happened, the witnesses must be eliminated. What has already been done, the records must be erased. There is nothing new under the sun, and there will be nothing new outside of the sun. In the end, those thunderous voices echoed in his ears, as if they wanted to carve an irrefutable law into his soul. This world is the same from the beginning of time. Huaishir opened his eyes and stared at the unfamiliar ceiling. His mind was completely blank. Who am I? Where am I? What am I going to do? You're finally awake? Ai Qing's voice echoed in his ears. What a long sleep. I am Huaishir? He finally managed to distinguish the part of his chaotic memories that belonged to him. The Book of Destiny reorganized everything, but he still couldn't pull his thoughts out of the chaos. How long was I asleep? 27 hours. Ai Qing sighed. A whole 27 hours. In the long 27 hours, she tried everything to wake Huaishir up, but all her attempts outside of the game were useless. The sound of dice rolling could be heard constantly. Countless complicated decisions flashed in front of Ai Qing, but it was difficult to find the main point. KP smiled from beginning to end, quietly admiring her gloomy appearance. He held the character card Clement in his hand, waiting for her to surrender and give up. As long as she was willing, the game could restart at any time. If Huaishir didn't wake up, Ai Qing didn't even know how long her meaningless persistence could continue. But persistence was actually meaningless. When KP revealed his trump card in front of her, she knew that perhaps her struggle all this time had already ended in failure. While she was pondering, she suddenly heard Huaishir's voice. Ai Qing, are you hiding something? She frowned subconsciously and looked at KP, but KP just smiled and played with his dice. He just shrugged slightly to express his innocence. Your instructions are too few. Huaishir said, if it was in the past, you wouldn't have let me mess around even if you kept silent, right? Ai Qing was silent for a long time and just said, I'm thinking. Do you have a result? Yes. Ai Qing replied unhappily, the result of thinking is that it's the same as the reality outside. Most of the time, thinking is useless and will only hurt you. I don't have a way to solve the current dilemma. To be honest, I also want to provide you with effective suggestions that can solve the problem, but I'm afraid you won't like it. She paused and unwillingly lowered her eyes. It's up to you to decide how to complete your mission. Huaishir was stunned. My mission? Paracusal? Didn't he die half a year ago? Ai Qing shook her head in pity. You'll understand soon. At that moment, Huaishir's expression suddenly twitched. He felt the crazy killing intent emerging from his heart and the uncontrollable heat and thirst in his chest. It was the thirst for blood and death. Because he saw Lily. His heart was beating wildly, as if it was about to burst. A large amount of hormones was secreted uncontrollably, making him fall into an indescribable state of madness. It was as if he had become a beast. He convulsed violently, raised his hand like an epileptic, and struggled to get up. If it weren't for the fact that his limbs were weak at the moment, he might have jumped up and torn her throat. What's wrong with you? Lily looked down at him in astonishment, reached out and opened his eyes. She lowered her head and looked carefully. Breathing difficulties, pupil constriction, arrhythmia. Are they side effects that haven't been recorded? A soft breath blew on his face. It was like the wind in hell. It made his canine teeth slowly grow, and purple-black capillaries appeared on his pale face. It was so ferocious. Don't be afraid. Lily lowered her head, took out the syringe from her waist bag, and the set of alchemy instruments left by Huaishir. She moved quickly, and soon, the colorless medicine was injected into his carotid artery. Don't worry, it's just some tranquilizers and mixed serum. Lily reached out to feel his body temperature and said softly, maybe the poison in your body hasn't been cleaned up. This will probably make you feel better. No, Huaishir gasped with difficulty. The bone-deep killing intent was quickly diluted by sleepiness. His convulsing limbs gradually calmed down. As the purple-black network on his face faded, Huaishir regained his calmness again. In other words, he was finally able to suppress the uncontrollable crazy killing intent in his heart and forced himself to calm down. But countless thunderous roars still lingered in his consciousness. It was like an iron commandment, constantly bringing the violent shock of whipping and the burning pain of thunder. Kill her! Must kill her! Must kill Paracelsus! But that old man died half a year ago. Why sure roared in his heart, I've been looking for a dead man for half a year. The mission has been completed long ago. But he still left something behind, didn't he? Ai Ching's voice sounded, and it was so compassionate. Think carefully, why sure, you know Abraham Van Helsing's mission, is it really to kill Paracelsus? Think carefully. Find that person, follow that person, and then kill that person. In a trance, the majestic and old voice sounded in his ears again. At all costs, let the blasphemers work, let the deformed child who will only tarnish the achievements of God be smashed to pieces. His work? Yes, his work. Ai Ching said softly. The only work left behind by the alchemy grandmaster, who is known as the creator of the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone? The embodiment of miracles in the human world, the omnipotent crystal, the elixir of immortality, the combination of countless wishes and the will of heaven, one of all, one of all. It was not only used to describe level 5 ascendant. Since ancient times, this existence had been given high hopes and expectations by countless people. From the beginning, it was the peak of miracles that was almost impossible to achieve. When the harbingers became a thorn in the side of the church, and creationism and evolution theory gradually became incompatible, what other work would be crowned with such a lofty title? In his torn consciousness, Huai sure thought with difficulty, and finally felt the loneliness and pain as if he was facing an infinite darkness. It was as if he had finally experienced Ai Ching's powerlessness. Think, Huai sure, think carefully. Don't tell me there aren't enough clues left for you? Think, experience the pain when I think. You'll understand the only truth. Lily. In that instant, Huai sure murmured in disbelief. She was created by Paracelsus? Is there a second possibility? Ai Ching asked in return. It clearly required many expensive materials to be compatible with the soul attribute to create, but it became so easy in her hands. It clearly required various formulas to create a precious potion, but as long as she drew a little of her own blood, she could successfully create it. She clearly looked mature, but sometimes she acted in such a childish way. Paracelsus had clearly died long ago, but when Huai sure realized the connection between him and Lily, such a violent killing intent emerged in his heart uncontrollably. This is the final truth, Huai sure. Ai Ching sighed. In front of you, the young scholar Lily, registered as Hell, is the most outstanding result of Paracelsus. Just her existence completely overturned creationism, a miracle that pushed evolution theory to a whole new level. The Philosopher's Stone born from the flask, a soul created out of thin air, not bound by the rules of day and night reincarnation, day and night an artificial human. If it was a false life, it would be impossible to welcome the second morning sun. If there was no soul, it would be impossible to ascend from the tributary of the Silver Sea and become a ascendant. If there was no compassion and kindness in the heart, it would be impossible to become a believer in the Holy Spirit pedigree. An artificial thing had life, an empty shell was given a soul, and a heretic became a believer of many Holy Spirits. No matter which of these 3 points was related, the Holy Spirit pedigree would not allow her to live until the next morning. She must die. As long as she lived, it was a denial of creationism, the church, and the gods. This was the original sin she was born with. The child of original sin created by Paracelsus. Bingo! KP applauded in admiration and expressed his appreciation without any reservation. You are an excellent investigator, Ms. AI. Congratulations, you have solved the hidden puzzle of this module. The death of Paracelsus. Chapter 146. Bingo! KP applauded in admiration and expressed his appreciation without any reservation. You are an excellent investigator, Ms. AI. Congratulations, you have solved the hidden puzzle of this module. The death of Paracelsus. He paused for a moment and revealed a mysterious smile. If you can complete the secret mission after clearing the module, I will give you an additional reward. Believe me, it will not be inferior to the fragment of the Philosopher's Stone. In this regard, Ai Ching did not feel the slightest bit of joy. Because this was the mission that Abraham Van Helsing could not escape from. Completely strangle this miracle. In the silence, Huai Shi stared at the ceiling in a daze for a long time. He looked at Lily's back as she operated the alchemy equipment and suddenly whispered, "If only I had discovered it earlier." Ai Ching sneered at such weakness. "Would it have been easier for you? I don't know. At least I can lie to myself that everyone who boarded this ship deserved it. You can also lie to yourself now. This is just a game, a piece of history. No matter what you do, no one will pursue the record." Yes. Huai Shi closed his eyes. This was just a record of the past. This was not even something that really happened. It was just a game built with the fragment of the Philosopher's Stone. Just like what he did in the past. He should have been used to it. As long as he pulled the trigger, everything would be fine. Regardless of whether the people in front of him were old or young, they were already dead, and it had nothing to do with him. This was just a game, but he could still grow. How beautiful! But when Huai Shi looked at Lily's back, he did not know what to do. Her back was facing Huai Shi. She was defenseless. She concentrated on adjusting the ratio of the potion in the crucible, focused and relaxed, as if she was in her own home. She softly hummed a song from an unknown place in her throat. Huai Shi was almost certain that this was not an illusion like the second body, but a real whole. He did not even need an axe. As long as he pulled out the flying dagger that was close at hand, he could completely end all of this. His fingers twitched. In the end, he retracted his hand weakly. "I can't do it, Ai Ching." Huai Shi sighed dejectedly and lowered his eyes tiredly. "If I kill her, I'm afraid I'll become the kind of person I hate the most. If he killed Lily here, then what was the difference between him and the instructor who massacred an entire village for an insignificant reason? What would happen to the person who was angry and sad because of this? To kill his past self? Perhaps Ai Ching would tell him that this was growth. The so-called growth was to deny the past self. Huai Shi never minded denying himself. However, he could not imagine how he would face Lily, who was lying in a pool of blood. Would that pair of pure eyes regret trusting Huai Shi in the end? Anger? Sorrow? Or was it the kind of serenity that calmly accepted everything in the end? "If it were you, what would you do, Ai Ching?" "I would probably hesitate just like you," Ai Ching replied calmly, "but in the end I think I would kill her. I want to save myself. No matter what happens, I have to live." Huai Shi was silent. "Do you want me to give you an order, Huai Shi?" Ai Ching asked. "It's like I ordered you to spare Qi Yuan's life. I ordered you to kill her. If you want, I can do that. After all, this is the relationship between us. You're in charge of the operation, and I'll take care of the rest. The so-called supervisor is used to do this. You don't have to worry about it." Huai Shi did not speak again. "Then, Huai Shi, I order you." Ai Ching made a cruel voice. "Finish your task and kill Lily." "Wait a minute." Huai Shi subconsciously opened his mouth, but at that moment, he finally understood. "See, only when the coin falls you know which side you want." Ai Ching sighed and lowered her eyes. "I won't give you any more orders, Huai Shi. You have to make your own decisions and face the consequences." "But is this really okay?" Across the table, KP smiled and asked. "He doesn't even know that this decision is related to your life." "No, it should be said that you have been confusing one point from the beginning to the end." Ai Ching raised her eyes and looked at him. "Even if he doesn't complete his task, as long as he can set foot on the new world, it means that the module has passed. If he wants to live, he doesn't have to kill Lily. It sounds like that. I don't deny your conjecture. KP shrugged. Unfortunately, I thought you would be more straightforward and decisive, more like the person I saw in the file. People always change, don't they? Ai Ching retorted coldly. Besides, you want me to force him to kill Lily. That's your real purpose, KP, right? KP was silent for a moment and slowly nodded. That is true. I don't see fairness in your game, at least. There is no fairness in your rulebook. You need to understand this. This is just like justice. KP revealed an ambiguous smile. It will occasionally be late, but occasionally it will also be absent. But not this time. Ai Ching stared at him and told him firmly, as long as I'm here, it won't happen. I am looking forward to it. KP smiled. He threw the dice in his hand. The game continued. Lily's medicine was effective. At least, the large amount of tranquilizers inside was effective. The present Huaishur could barely restrain the surging killing intent in his heart and carry out some weak activities. Like a patient who had been lying in bed for a long time, he walked around the narrow cabin and carried out some rehabilitation activities. In fact, there was no need. As long as there was enough blood, vampires could quickly recover their health. For Lily, artificial blood was a piece of cake. It was even apple-flavored. As for the effect, although it was a little lacking, it was at least better than nothing. Huaishur had already recovered 60% of his strength. But because of his chaotic thoughts and the uncontrollable killing intent in his heart, he didn't know how to face Lily. After the initial thanks, he didn't say anything else. He just sat alone in the corner, holding a pen and writing in the Book of Destiny, trying to clear his thoughts. But soon, he found that this didn't do any good to the irritation and anxiety in his heart. In addition, there was one more thing he didn't tell Ai Ching. Because he found that the holy mark of a believer was extremely similar to a ghost. No, if he looked at it chronologically, a part of the core of a ghost came from a believer. It was just that the two were diametrically opposite. The former selflessly shared this favor with a pure source of piety, while Huaishur was a negative energy generator. And now he had become a vampire, a negative energy absorber. It was like walking on the road of the abyss to the end. So, how many parts did Crow use to assemble the holy mark of a ghost? No, it should be said that in addition to the holy mark of a believer, how many miracles were related to the abyss pedigree? How deep was the water of the abyss pedigree? At this point, Huaishur was no longer the silly boy who didn't know anything. At the very least, he understood bits and pieces of it. In this world, there was no miracle for no reason. The real miracle wouldn't suddenly appear, suddenly come, and suddenly disappear. In other words, no pedigree appeared out of thin air. There must be a reason. So, where did the abyss pedigree come from? Or was the Astronomy Association really powerful enough to create a non-existent holy mark pedigree with their bare hands? This was more terrifying than Paracelsus creating an android with his bare hand. After all, there was only one Lily, but a pedigree could exist forever and be transmitted to tens of millions of people. Each pedigree could be said to be the foundation of the world's axis left behind by the god. Now that the gods were dead, the Astronomy Association's move was no different from creating a group of gods with their bare hands, and they had also obtained the approval of the world's axis. Was it possible? The more Huaishur thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. He rubbed his eyebrows in annoyance, and then he noticed Lily's cautious gaze not far away. As if sensing the irritation and depression in Huaishur's heart, she didn't disturb him. Instead, she flipped through the dictionary in her hand and secretly looked at him, thinking that she was very covert. Noticing his gaze, her expression froze for a moment, and then she became calm, as if nothing had happened. Ahem. She asked, "Are you busy?" No, Huaishur shook his head. He didn't know how to tell her. But she had already come over and curiously looked at the messy words that Huaishur had recorded in the book. After finding that she couldn't understand them, she looked at the scribble that Huai Shi had casually sketched in annoyance in the corner. Then she froze. Who is this? She leaned closer and looked at the mocking and arrogant face in the notebook. With just a few strokes, the cold and cruel eyes were so vividly depicted. He was opening his mouth, as if he was about to spit out vicious words. It made people feel uneasy. Huai Shi didn't know how to explain. In the end, he could only say, This person is called Brother Ravenfly. Then Lily understood. Beelzebub? Probably. Huai Shi wiped the sweat on his head. He likes to make people eat shit. What about this black man? Lily asked. He looks very confused. Yes, he's very confused. Huai Shi added 3 question marks above the black man's head. What about this? This is a frog called Pepe. Why does it look so sad? I don't know. Huai Shi sighed. Probably because it's very painful to live. That's a pity. It looks quite cute. Lily shook her head regretfully. Like a little doll, but Hohenheim didn't like it. He even threw away what I made. Really? Huai Shi was silent for a moment and shook his head. He shouldn't have done that. Well, when people get old, they probably have a bad temper. But when they lose their temper, they regret it and apologize to me, hoping that I'll forgive him, but I've never been angry with him. Lily curled up in the chair and sighed softly. He was very panicked before he died, as if he was hiding from something, but he never told me. After giving me this ticket, he passed away. In the end, he didn't allow me to call him father. In the silence, Huai Shi hesitated for a long time and reached out to touch her hair. I believe that in his heart you're more important than anything. Who knows? Lily shook her head. Everyone's heart is hidden in their chest, and no one will see what's inside until they die. Hohenheim told me to learn to protect myself, but I don't even know what to guard against. How can I know what other people are hiding in their hearts? Yes. Huai Shi responded dryly. Feeling the almost boiling, killing intent in his chest, he couldn't help but want to vomit. He felt disgusted by his hypocrisy. Well, speaking of which, he stiffly changed the topic. How old are you this year? I mean your age. Well, let me think. Lily didn't seem to notice this. She lowered her head and began to write and draw quickly in the notebook. Huai Shi leaned over to take a look and then felt dizzy. In the middle of the various long numerical calculations, there was a simple diagram of the movement of the planets. It was as if she was revising the calendar. Even calculating age was so hardcore. Soon, Lily finished the calculation. 4.5 years old. Huh. Huai Shi was stunned. 4.5 years old? Sister, are you kidding? Huai Shi looked at her mature appearance in amazement. Even if we are of different races, you should at least be an adult, right? My physique is not the same as the average person. Lily seemed to react and stiffly avoided the question. You. I'm 17, Huai Shi replied. Lily's expression instantly became disgusted. Liar, but your bone age is already 38 years old. I can only say that due to various reasons. Huai Shi sighed. He felt that he sighed more today than in the previous year. He had no idea how to introduce himself to Lily. After all, he was now Van Helsing. Abraham Van Helsing. He was the executioner of the church, the vampire hunter, and the murderer who came to kill Lily just as he was deep in thought. He heard Lily's cheerful voice. Look, I've also finished drawing. What did you draw? Huai Shi lowered his head and then spat out a mouthful of water. Just below the title page of his dictionary, there was a vivid panda head emoji, but the face was empty because I don't know what emoji to draw. Lily scratched her head in distress. I feel that no matter what I draw, it can't surpass your drawing. That's because my drawing is the crystallization of the wisdom of countless people. How can you compare to it alone? To be able to draw an emoji in the year 1620, it could only be said that It was a fresh experience that Huaishur had never imagined. Amidst his messy thoughts, he heard Lily's voice. Huaishur. At some point, the girl had turned in front of Huaishur. Her eyes blinked and were full of expectation. I just thought, why don't we travel together after we reach the new world? Anyway, I have nothing to go to. You have nowhere to go, right? And I can make blood for you, so you don't have to worry about finding food anymore. Huaishur looked at her blankly. He didn't know how to answer. Can't I? Lily asked. No, it's good. Huaishur shook his head stiffly and asked dryly, Do you have anywhere you want to go? Yellowstone, how about it? Lily thought for a moment and suggested, I've always wanted to go to Yellowstone. It's said that there are many geothermal springs there, and there are lions and elephants. What about you? I don't know. Huaishur lowered his eyes and his voice was a little hoarse. I haven't thought about it yet, so let's talk about it next time. I have to sleep for a while. Lily was stunned for a moment and nodded. She returned to her workbench and continued to monitor the progress of the potion. But after a long time, she couldn't help but look back at Huaishur, who was leaning against the bed. Am I bothering you? No. So, she breathed a sigh of relief and asked nervously, We are friends, right? Yes. Huaishur lowered his eyes. We are friends. That's great. Lily smiled happily like a child, ran over, and gave him a gentle hug. Huaishur didn't even have time to react. Then you sleep, I won't disturb you. She realized that she had lost her composure, took a step back and picked up her dictionary. Ahem, when you are free, let's talk again. Huaishur looked at her blankly for a long time and closed his eyes. Damn it! Looking at the defenseless girl with her back facing him, Huaishur reached into his arms and grabbed the cold handle of the dagger. He quietly pulled it out and stared at the pair of scarlet eyes reflected on the dagger's blade. Then, he threw the broken toy to the side. F***ck the church. F***ck Van Helsing. F***ck everything. Old. Son. No. F***ck. F***ck. Enduring the pain of anger in his heart, Huaishur raised his head and breathed a long sigh of relief. He smiled. Lily, how about I teach you how to draw a crying cat's head? Okay. When it was about evening, there was a commotion outside the door. After a while, someone gently knocked on the door and asked if there was anyone inside. After they opened the door warily, the person outside the door smiled and brought good news. America was about to arrive. Thanks to the turmoil, so many people died. The speed of the ship was unbelievably fast. Not long ago, there was a witch on the ship who was good at astrology who calculated the distance between them and America. If they maintained this speed, they would reach the new world tomorrow morning. Everyone would be able to obtain freedom and relief. Therefore, someone proposed to hold a banquet to celebrate. At this moment, the gloomy and depressing atmosphere on the ship had been swept away. Everyone looked happy, with a warm smile, gentle conversation, and elegant behavior. It was as if they had been reborn. For some reason, Huaishur's heart couldn't help but sink. Yesterday's turmoil and disaster didn't seem to have left any traces on the ship. The story continued. It was developing towards the predetermined ending. He lowered his head and only saw the end of the chapter that slowly appeared on the Book of Destiny. A line of large black words. To be continue. Chapter 147. Why do they all look so happy? I don't know. In the corner of the restaurant, Huaishur looked at the happy faces and slowly shook his head. Was this freedom in sight, or was it the joy of arriving in a new world? It was like the TVB saying that after this trip, they would go to Canada, where no one would know them, and they could start anew. With the approach of the new world, everything in the past was thrown to the back of their minds. So they were reborn. This long journey of suffering was about to come to an end, so it was time for the final celebration. The originally messy restaurant had been cleaned up, and under the collective efforts of the group, it was rearranged. In a jubilant atmosphere, everywhere was decorated with lanterns and colored banners. The purified food was carefully cooked and served on the table for the guests to use. The unlimited amount of alcohol was taken out from the warehouse, and several tall champagne towers were piled up, reflecting the sparkling light. The survivors who had changed into decent clothes raised their glasses to each other and greeted each other politely. There were even a few people on the podium who formed a small band, playing a melody that was neither unpleasant nor pleasant to the ears. Some people even invited Huaishur, but Huaishur refused with the excuse that he was not feeling well. He just sat in the corner of the restaurant, looking at all this. He only felt that it was ridiculous. It had only been 20 hours since the chaos of the wolf disaster, but all the suffering and uneasiness seemed to have been thrown to the back of their minds. It was as if there was an invisible force faintly leading all of this, and then everyone's fate was back on track. You can call it the gravity of the plot. All of this was originally a record left in the fragment of the Philosopher's Stone. Ai Ching said, "It's like a calendar with all the schedules written. No matter what happened in the past 2 days, the things that have been set will not change." Ai Ching's words made Huaishur's heart sink again. Although she didn't say it directly, there was no doubt what she meant. Even if there was a huge degree of freedom, this was still a record drawn by KP from the Philosopher's Stone. The past history. Just like history would not change, what happened on this ship would not change. Just like the identity of the people who boarded the ship and this banquet. And the final result. In history, who on this ship reached America? No one knew. There were probably tens of thousands of ships flying the Mayflower flag from all over the world heading for America, but how many of them actually made it to America? The more joyous and peaceful the atmosphere was, the more uneasy Huaishur felt. It was like sitting on the crater of a silent volcano, feeling the heat rising up from below. Even if it looked peaceful for the time being, there was no telling when the magma would erupt and blast them out of the stratosphere together with their skin and bones. But Lily seemed to be having a good time. Anyway, she had never seen anything before. Ever since Parathussel created her, she had been wandering around with her, living a precarious life as a vagrant, not to mention attending a banquet. This was a completely new experience for her. Even the deaf man on the stage was listening to the tug-of-war cello with great interest. Huaishur wished he could rush up and beat up the broken thing playing the cello. It was simply torture. Your right hand is weak, the score is not good, the technique is loose, the rhythm is slow, none of your movements are decent. When Huaishur couldn't stand it anymore, he was already standing on the stage, looking down at the guy playing the cello, frowning. "Who is your teacher? How can I let you go on stage with this kind of performance?" The guy who was foolishly playing the zither looked at Huaishur in a daze. After staring blankly for a long time, he obediently handed the zither to him. "Watch carefully, learn well." Huaishur picked up the bow and played the Beethoven No. 5 for him again, then raised his eyes and asked, "Have you learned it?" The people next to him shook their heads. Only Lily below the stage was clapping her hands excitedly. Anyway, she couldn't tell whether it was good or bad, but she thought it sounded good. Huaishur suddenly felt powerless and stuffed the bow back into the guy's hand. "Forget it, pretend I didn't say anything, you continue." Seeing his helpless look, Lily kindly comforted him. "Don't be depressed, although you are a little worse than him, it is already very good." Huaishur spat out a mouthful of blood. Until now, he just realized that Lily seemed to be tone-deaf? "Okay, whatever you say." Huaishur was speechless. He picked up the glass and continued to drink the tomato and apple-flavored artificial blood that Lily made for him. He had to admit that this kind of nutritious meal was simply disgusting. Couldn't she make something normal? However, she was in a state of resistance to all non-experimental alcohol, and Huaishur's rare opportunity to taste foreign wine was gone. Just as the two were talking, he noticed a crisp sound coming from afar. It sounded like a slap in the face. He looked up and saw Yin, whom he hadn't seen for a long time, and a big red palm mark on his face. Papaya, who had been coldly looking at the group of tourists, was angrily scolding him. Soon, she went directly to the balcony outside the restaurant. The one-armed Yin now looked very embarrassed. Sensing Huaishi's gaze, he coldly looked at him and turned to leave. That guy is up to no good. In this regard, Ai Qing commented without pity. Since childhood, that guy likes to pretend to be pitiful to gain sympathy, and then secretly do things when no one suspects him. His second brother and sister have been tricked by him many times. I only have one question. Huaishi hesitated for a long time, and his heart was full of curiosity. Is your house a tiger's den? Isn't that what the so-called big families are like? Ai Qing said indifferently, from the moment of birth, the competition begins. Whoever can win the favor of the old master will have more status and more money. Well, I should be glad that I'm an only child, right? Do you want me to follow him? Huaishi rubbed his hands, looking for a chance to beat this grandson up. If he knows that you saw him, he will definitely hide immediately. You won't be able to find anything even if you follow him. Ai Qing said, just raise your guard. Also, pay attention to his old mistress. She and her brother always give people a feeling that something is not right. Moreover, there is no place for them in the American genealogy of later generations. They probably died on this ship. I'm afraid there are still risks lurking in the dark. You should be careful. Hearing this, Huaishi looked out of the window at the balcony. Just between the row of seats with parasols, next to Papaya, he saw the old man in the wheelchair. As if he was still in the late stage of Parkinson's, Koth was still holding his soup bowl, sipping the spoon and the thick soup in the bowl. His white hair, which was almost falling off, swayed slightly in the wind, revealing his scalp with scars. His trembling movements always made people break out in a cold sweat, making people wonder if he still had the physical strength to travel. But from beginning to end, his eyes were quietly staring at the front of the ship. It was as if he could see the vast land thousands of miles away through the deep barrier between the border and the present realm. His expression was so focused and solemn, like a child looking forward to a new home. Look, Yaga. He whispered softly, that's America, our new home. Brother, my home is not there. There are only savages, war, and people abandoned by Rome. Yaga answered in a hoarse voice. Unexpectedly, this time, she did not go crazy or angrily scold her brother. As if she was tired, she just leaned on the chair and stared tiredly in the opposite direction of her brother. Why did you bring me here? She whispered to herself. I'm not like you, brother. I don't have such great ambitions and aspirations. I'm just a crazy woman who wants to die as soon as possible. America is too far away. I just want to go back to my chicken foot house, but my Bobby is dead. I have no place to go back. Then don't go back. Koth raised his voice and coughed as if he was angry and growled. Don't miss the land that abandoned us, Yaga. Put away your outrageous look. If you're angry, get angry. If you're not happy, get angry. Don't be a joke to the gods who abandoned us. But what's the use of being angry? Can it make you change your decision? Yaga looked up at him, her eyes sad. I don't want to go to America. I just want to stay in Siberia, my house. My dead daughter's grave and my husband's grave. Everything I am is there, I am Barbara Yaga, I am a witch, I am an abomination. But what am I when I leave Slavic? Yaga covered her face tiredly. I'm nothing, brother. I'm nothing. I can only be a crazy woman. A pretty face can make me lose my mind. A sweet talk will make me forget myself. What else can I do? Tell me, brother, what's left of me? Koth panted heavily and stared at her. But at least you're alive. We still have hope of climbing the mountain again. Don't people like me deserve to die? We deserve to suffer in hell. In the deepest place. Yaga could not stand his daydreaming any longer. She choked back her sobs and asked, "Why do you force a damned witch to accompany you in your search for salvation? Brother, tell me, shouldn't we have died a long time ago? Listen, my sister, don't be bewitched by that damned gigolo. What does a clown know? Do you want to be controlled by a toy?" Koth stared at his last relative and told him word by word, "Yaga, people always need a new beginning. No, we will have a new beginning. Don't dream, brother, please, at least don't be like them. You know the curse, you've always known it. You're just talking in your sleep, but you can't even fool me. You can only fool yourself." Yaga interrupted him angrily. Her voice was hoarse and desperate. She did not know how to wake her brother up. Koth's expression became angry, and he panted heavily. He opened his mouth to speak, but then he coughed violently. His face was red. In the end, he was almost suffocating. Every time the two of them argued to the end, he would end up like this. Yaga stared at his face, not knowing whether it was because he was too weak, or because he wanted his sister to retain a little gentleness and pity for her dying brother. "You're too despicable, brother." Yaga shook her head in disappointment. "You've always been like this, always." She took out her magic medicine pot, picked up Koth's soup spoon, poured a drop, and poured it into his mouth. But this time, the usual dosage could no longer bring about the miraculous effect. Koth was still in pain. She was stunned for a moment, and panicked a little. She kept pouring the magic medicine down Koth's throat. It was not until half the pot was gone that Koth could barely breathe again. But after a moment of relief, his face turned pale again. As if he was enduring some kind of pain, countless purple blood vessels appeared under his loose skin, crawling on his body like vines. He widened his eyes in shock, clutched his chest, and gasped violently. "I feel, not so." He suddenly spat out a mouthful of dark blood and said with difficulty, "Not so good. Crack!" There seemed to be a cracking sound from his body. He was stunned for a moment, and then seemed to understand something. His expression suddenly became shocked, and in the end, it became indescribably ferocious. He looked at Yaga, who was in a daze. What did you give me?" "My medicine." "No, my medicine shouldn't." Yaga looked down at the bottle in her hand, and her face was pale. But then, she could not help but scream. Koth had stood up from the wheelchair, and his skinny arms suddenly reached out and grabbed her neck, angrily lifting her off the deck. "Bitch! Give it to me! Drink it!" "What?" "I swear. I don't know." Yaga cried in horror and screamed, "I don't know anything! Really!" At that moment, Koth's face completely turned into a beast. So ferocious. In the engine room of the warehouse, hidden in a dark corner, Yin Yen seemed to have heard the chaos in the distance. He could not help but sneer and look down at his pocket. The strange potion that could prolong the life of the living and bring the dead back to life was now hidden in his pocket, in another inconspicuous bottle. The potion in Yaga's silver bottle had been replaced by the terrifying weapon that the Red Hat brought on board the ship, the water of Styx. This was why everyone was at grade 3, and he was the only one at grade 2. It was also what he relied on to complete his secret and kill Koth. No, if he used it well, together with the Red Hat's stealth ability, he could even kill anyone on the ship. Ever since he boarded the ship, he had been holding back, waiting for any opportunity to kill Koth. But he found that, under the appearance of an idiot, the old man was full of vigilance. There was no chance for him to make a move. Except for Yaga, who protected his life, he did not trust anyone on this ship. Beneath that seemingly frail appearance, there was a dark essence that terrified him even to this day. It was as if thousands of souls were imprisoned in Koth's body. He cruelly squeezed the souls sealed in his body and absorbed all of their power to prolong his life. If this power was released, who knew what kind of disaster it would cause? But now it had nothing to do with him. Once the water of Styx entered his stomach, Koth would die without a doubt. It was not an incurable poison, but a miraculous creation that was extracted from the depths of the silver sea. If the ashes were the essence of a life's death, then the water of Styx was the sediment left behind by the decay of a soul. It represented the decay and destruction of a soul. Anyone who drank a drop would age their soul by 1 year. The amount he poured into Yaga's bottle was enough to kill a grade 4 ascendant in an instant, not to mention Koth, who did not have much time left to live. Today was the day the undying demon king met his end. He did not win because he was a hero, but because his own life was coming to an end, and he had accomplished his mission perfectly. All he had to do was hide and wait for everyone on this ship to be reduced to ashes by Koth's final struggle. In the end, he would reach the new continent and become the only victor. He suppressed his excited smile and raised his head. Then, he saw the tall and sturdy figure standing in front of him without him noticing. No, rather than tall and sturdy, it was more accurate to say that the figure was enormous, like a giant. Yin froze in place. "Sorry, I forgot to ask you before I came in." A hoarse and mocking voice came from under the hood. "May I come in?" Yin looked up at the figure in a daze. He tried to back away, but a tentacle-like limb suddenly shot out from under the hood and wrapped around his leg. "Since we were once teammates, I don't want to be too rough. After all, we can't do what we want." As he spoke, the figure slowly twisted his neck and took off his hood, revealing a familiar face covered in scars. He smiled at Yin. "Can you give me the potion in your pocket?" In that instant, Yin's face shrank as if he had seen a ghost. "Why is it you, then?" Darkness came. The peaceful banquet came to an abrupt end amidst a hoarse scream. The sound of the music was cut off. Everyone turned their heads in a daze and looked at the violently changing figure on the balcony. It was as if he had suddenly expanded. From the old man's shriveled body, a large piece of flesh suddenly swelled up, followed by another large piece. They were like living creatures that were swimming under the loose skin, causing Ko-Sish's body to change rapidly. Sometimes it was tiring, sometimes it was beastly. In the end, countless tumors and deformities had uncontrollably appeared on his hunched body. In the blink of an eye, he turned into a monster made of mud. He barely maintained his original shape, twitching and struggling. Chapter 148. Yaga, save me! Save me! Kush screamed hoarsely, his voice rising and falling. "I'm in so much pain." Yaga's face was pale. In the end, she shook her head stiffly. "I can't save you, brother. You're hopeless, liar!" Kush roared, his deformed face full of anger. He grabbed Yaga's neck, his deformed fingers tightening like an iron clamp. "You actually wanted to harm me. You actually wanted to kill your only brother. You *tch, you." Yaga's face was pale and she could not breathe. She could only look at her crazy brother in despair. Soon, she let go of her hand weakly and gave up struggling. But then, she was pushed to the deck angrily, vomiting blood and almost unable to breathe. At the last moment, Kush let go of her. "Look, my dear, look what you've done." He staggered back, his body melting into layers of mud, piling up on the deck and spreading everywhere. "I originally wanted to protect you. We could escape to America together." His twisted face was full of pain and madness, leaving a trail of muddy tears. After I leave, what are you going to do?" Yaga looked at him blankly and did not speak. But Kush staggered back a step, turned around, and looked at the stunned passengers. Huai Sher was familiar with the fierce look in his eyes. At least I'll let you." At that moment, killing intent erupted like a tide. "Let's go." Huai Sher did not care about anything else. He grabbed Lily and ran out of the restaurant. Then, a black tide gushed out of Kush's mouth. Huai Sher only heard the sound of glass shattering behind him. Then, a dark storm, torrential rain, and flood poured into the restaurant with a sharp whistle. It covered everything. In the blink of an eye, the fake peace and joy were torn apart so easily. In the storm, everyone felt a tremor that shook their souls. Then, the rain and sticky black flood hit him in the face. The black sludge was mixed in and shot out like bullet. In an instant, a large number of souls were harvested amidst the screams. Then, the sticky sludge fell to the ground, and vague figures struggled to climb out from it. Like the evil spirits in hell, they grabbed at everything that could move around them, pulling them inch by inch into the seemingly bottomless black mud. In the blink of an eye, countless strange silhouettes appeared. Hunters with bows and arrows, armored soldiers, ferocious-looking priests with scepters, and even women who looked like banshees. The gates of hell opened with a loud bang. The sins and souls that had been imprisoned within the cage flew out of Cush's open mouth and hovered in the air, as if they wanted to devour everything. This old ghost wants to self-destruct? Huaishur was dumbfounded. Is he crazy? What are you thinking? Every injustice has its perpetrator, and every debt has its debtor. Even if someone wants to harm you, you should go look for them. Why did he have to drag an entire ship with him? But there was no time to investigate these things. The souls that Cush had unleashed were all the ascendants that he had swallowed before, but hadn't digested. It could be said that they were a stockpile that had existed for nearly 1,000 years. Apart from the terrifying legends, Cush was most famous for his ability to manipulate souls. Apart from hiding his own souls in other places, he also liked to devour defeated enemies to transfer his aging and injuries. Now that he was about to die, he naturally didn't need these things to extend his lifespan. He simply unleashed them as an early attack with terrifying effect. Those who had been able to withstand his digestion and survive until now were either darkness descendants with powerful backgrounds or famous heroes. None of them were easy to deal with. Under Cush's influence, the origin substances that these people had left behind had already been soaked in darkness, turning them into complete lunatic. They were like wild dogs that had been released from their cages, biting anyone they saw. A storm of blood was about to erupt. Fortunately, Cush really was too old. He was so old that he almost couldn't lift his blade. If he had been at the peak of his strength, he probably would have been able to swallow the entire ship in an instant. Considering that a starving camel was still bigger than a horse, no one could say for sure how much strength this old ghost had left in his body. To be safe, they had to make preparations first. In the midst of her mad dash, Huaishur frantically tore off Lily's pouch. She didn't bother to differentiate between what was inside and what was inside. She grabbed the syringe that Lily had made beforehand and stabbed it into her neck without even looking at the label. Needle after needle, his neck was about to be turned into a sieve in just a few moments. All kinds of messy medicines mixed together and spread wildly in his blood. In the blink of an eye, the terrifying medicinal effects mixed with the scorching pain caused his eyes to turn red. The weakness that had wrapped around his limbs finally dissipated. Lily stared at him, dumbfounded. "What are you doing?" "Taking medicine." Huaishur's hands didn't stop moving. "Trust me, there's nothing wrong with taking medicine right now. I don't care about the side effects." Lily was stunned. "But those are blue ones. They're sleeping pills." Huaishur stared blankly for a moment, then stuffed the blue bottles back. He argued stubbornly, "It's fine as long as they're medicine. Let's not think too much about it. Strong stimulants, willpower awakening agent, recombinant fusion protein, silver blood medicine, strong artificial plasma." A series of medicines were injected into Huaishur's neck without blinking. The purple capillaries on Huaishur's face became more and more obvious. The blood vessels on his forehead pulsed wildly, as if they were about to burst. In the midst of the chaos, Huaishur's hand trembled, and half a tube of holy water was poured into her body. Her eyes almost popped out of their sockets as she screamed and spat out a bloody mist from her mouth. She had almost purified herself. After taking medicine like crazy, Huai Shi could feel the poison in his veins rising. Fortunately, he relied on this pile of medicine to get rid of the weakened state. He recovered about 80% of his combat strength from the punishment of the oath debuff. He sped up, but just as they were trying to avoid the dark rainstorm on the deck and hide in the cabin, they saw the originally tightly shut door open with a loud bang. The pitch-black flood gushed out from the door, sealing them in the corridor. A hideous face emerged from the dripping mud. They could vaguely make out Kush's features. Wait! Huai Shi didn't wait for him to speak. He raised his hand and explained, "Old man, we have no grudges in the past or in the present. Why do you have to, lies?" Kush roared. His voice swept over like a storm. The terrifying dark wind instantly corroded a layer of Huai Shi's face. Countless pieces of skin and flesh grew rapidly. It looked extremely tragic. "I recognize you. You're with that pretty boy." "That pretty boy? Where the hell is he?" I'm not. Don't talk nonsense." Huai Shi hurriedly waved his hand. "Look at my handsome face. How can I be the same as that gigolo? Ha, a vampire!" In the black mud, countless voices burst out. It was unknown whether they were laughing or screaming. "An assassin of the Holy Spirit lineage actually says that he's innocent." At that moment, Huai Shi jumped up, took the hand axe from his back, and chopped at that rotten face. In midair, he smashed a bottle of holy water on the blade of the axe. Thus, in the dark wind, the hand axe soaked in holy water glowed brightly. The blade of the axe whistled through the air. In an instant, the distorted face in the black mud was smashed into pieces. Since they were going to fight, there was no point in talking. Looking at the black mud surging behind the cabin door, and the countless figures struggling to get out, Huai Shi was so angry that his eyes turned red. It was a mistake not to have killed this scourge Yin Yen earlier. Then, the sound of paper being torn rang in his ears. Ai Ching said, "Yin Yen has left. F***ck so fast?" Huai Shi pulled Hila and ran in another direction. "Who did it?" "I don't know. In theory, you're the only player left in this game. But I think this might just be a smokescreen released by KP." Staring at the empty table in front of her and the smiling KP, Ai Ching asked calmly, "Other than me, there's at least one other player, right?" KP asked back, "How do you know? Otherwise, wouldn't this game of yours be too boring?" Ai Ching looked around indifferently at the empty chairs around her and said calmly, "From the beginning, you've separated us, haven't you? You were able to hide the fact that you communicated with me more than once. Why can't you help others hide their situation? Not to mention the sound of paper being torn. Now, it seems that not only in the game, sometimes even on the card table, it's just an illusion." KP raised his eyebrows happily. "I have to say your guess is very correct. As a reward, let me think." KP pondered for a moment before snapping his fingers. Instantly, opposite Ai Ching, a black figure appeared, but the silhouette and face could not be seen clearly. It was not even clear whether it was a man or a woman. However, there was no doubt that the person was smiling, and it was towards Ai Ching. I didn't expect that in the end, the first two investigators who noticed the cognitive impairment would stay. This is really beyond my expectations. I'm starting to look forward to the final result." KP chuckled. "However, before that, it's best to think about how to survive this disaster." At that moment, Huai Shi saw that on the ceiling above his head, countless fireproof sprinklers suddenly burst, and black mud spewed out from them. As the mud fell to the ground, countless figures struggled to crawl out from it and blocked in front of Huai Shi. Roars and roars. On the entire cruise ship, there was no safe place. Is this really an old man who's too old to walk? Huai Shi looked at the terrifying scale, dumbfounded. He's clearly about to die. How can his life be so tough? No. Lily stared at the struggling black mud with pity and said softly, "I'm afraid Kush is already dead." The terrifying darkness that shrouded the entire ship at the moment was just the embers left by the Demon King. Chapter 149. Dead? No one here could surpass Gila's understanding of life, but because of this, Huaisher found it hard to believe. Kush was probably already dead. The moment he let go of Jaga in pain, the once arrogant Demon King and Immortal died under the water of the Styx, ushering in his own end. But even if his soul had completely melted into the darkness that he had created, there was still something that death could not erase in this world. Just like the sacred remains of the sage stone after it passed away. After struggling at death's door for hundreds of years, Kush had tried everything he could to resist the death that should have come a long time ago. But when death came, he chose not to resist. Instead, he engraved his last will on his soulless corpse. This was his last will, his last wish, and his last order. At that moment, in the roar, the dark substance sealed in his body exploded and swallowed everything. In the end, his killing intent materialized and swept through the lone boat on the vast sea along with the pitch-black flood, swallowing and annihilating all life. At this moment, Mayflower trembled under the power of his own death and almost collapsed. They could not escape anymore. If the root cause was not eliminated as soon as possible, this ship would definitely not be able to last until the New World. But how? It was impossible to kill them all. Huaisher roared and slashed a figure that rushed up. When he looked back, he only saw that the red moon seemed to have melted into the darkness outside the porthole. As far as the eye could see, there was a scarlet color. It was like an ocean of blood. They had nowhere to run. Water, I need water. Lily's footsteps suddenly stopped and looked in the direction of the front deck pool. Give me enough water, I can hold them back, follow me. There was no time to listen to her explanation. Huaisher struggled to throw an empty bottle of blood on the ground, pulled out a short knife, and covered Lily as they rushed to the upper deck. Along the way, Huaisher saw more than once the escaping passengers were swallowed by the monsters in the mud, and more monsters were chasing after them. There was an endless amount of black sludge, as well as countless limbs and rotten bodies that crawled out of it. Who the F***ck knew how many living things Kush had devoured over the years. Not only humans, but there were also all kinds of unusual creatures and monsters, whether it was the two-headed giant eagle, hellhounds, or the long-extinct deer people. It was like a biological expo. There were only things that had never been seen before, and nothing that had never been eaten before. It could only be said that this old bastard's appetite was really good. When they reached the foredeck, they saw nothing but a bloody scene. Passengers were everywhere trying to flee or resist in vain. Amidst the mess and blood, all the monsters turned their heads to look at the new intruder. The terrifying scale made Huaisher swallow a mouthful of saliva. Lily, if you still can't come up with a solution, this time, we'll really be delivering ourselves to their doorstep. Lily stood in front of the pool as if she didn't hear anything. She tore a piece of paper from her notebook and quickly wrote something. Then, she threw the heavy bag into the pool. In the blink of an eye, the whole pool started to boil, and a pungent smell emerged from it. Nothing could be seen clearly in the thick, pale fog. It was like boiling cold water with quicklime. When Lily cut her finger, viscous blood dripped down from her fingertip, forming a thin line that flowed into the pool. Golden blood. When that drop of blood appeared on Lily's fingertip, Lily's face instantly turned pale, and she almost couldn't stand still. Huaisher almost couldn't control his thirst. He swallowed a mouthful of saliva and tried his best to restrain his urge to rush up and lick her finger. Soon, the blood blended into the huge pool. The terrifying abnormality made all the monsters pause for a moment. Soon, a muddy monster that was either a cheetah or a lion could no longer hold back its murderous intent. It leaped over the pool and pounced toward Lily. Lily had just thrown the paper in her hand into the boiling water. Huaisher raised his axe. What was faster than him was a thick arm that suddenly rose from the mist. The 5 fingers covered in calluses opened and grabbed the paper. Then, the other hand grabbed the monster's thigh and clenched it tightly, throwing it to the edge of the pool with all its might. There was a smack. The muddy mud collapsed. The sturdy middle-aged man with mottled white hair and a red brandy nose walked out of the pool with his big belly. Was it awakened again? Forget it, it doesn't matter. He spat a mouthful of thick phlegm on the ground and moved his stiff neck. The muscles on his thick arms bulged. His seemingly drunk eyes slowly looked up and glanced around indifferently. It was like a baby that had just been born. He was naked. Please wait a moment. Lily rummaged through her purse in a flurry and finally found the wilted flower. Your flower. Ah, thank you. The captain grinned and revealed a happy smile. He carefully took it and deeply inhaled the remaining fragrance. Then, he pinned the withered flower branch between his mottled white hair. His fierce eyes became gentle. Then, little girl, please step back, he said. I'm going to start working. He casually pulled a tattered bath towel from the recliner and wrapped it around his waist. Then, the recliner that was welded to the deck was pulled up by him and slammed into the monsters in front of him. So many people sneaked onto my ship. The captain roared. Did you buy tickets? The dead in the mud roared. They did not seem to have a trace of remorse at all. So, the captain became even angrier. His muscles bulged, and his whole body emitted a high temperature like a furnace. The soles of his feet crushed the deck and made a violent roar. He rushed forward. Boom! Like a cannonball falling into a quagmire, countless mud splashed out in an instant. Behind him, the cyborg crew members who had died in the daytime climbed out of the pool one by one, spitting out the amniotic fluid in their lungs. They nodded to Lily as they passed by, and then turned a blind eye to Huaishur. They picked up the messy things on the ground and then rushed to the monsters that were besieging them. For a time, the front deck was full of naked muscular men carrying all kinds of strange things to fight the monsters. Huaishur only felt that his eyes were deeply hurt. He was already prepared for his allies to die in an instant. But soon, his jaw was about to fall off. That group of burly muscular crewmen actually relied on their unreasonable strength and speed to forcibly hold back the spreading sludge? It was as if 70 or 80 Arnolds suddenly jumped out of the pool, each with a head of copper and arms of iron, with a body of iron and bones of iron. Huaishur saw with his own eyes that several monsters opened their big mouths and bit their skulls, but their teeth were about to break. Encountering this kind of skull, no mace could withstand it. Even if they were seriously injured under the siege of the monsters, after taking 2 steps back, they would take out a box of canned vegetables from some corner and pour it into their mouth, and after chewing it twice, they would quickly return to their original state and continue to fight without fear of death. Huaishur picked up a few empty cans and looked at them for a long time in disbelief. They were not magical relics or alchemy potions, they were really all canned spinach. What the hell spinach? What kind of scientific principle is this? Huaishur was dumbfounded. It was simply a miracle. Not only did they create an army of cyborgs in one go, but they also gave them incredible strength on top of their original foundation. Huaishur secretly calculated the amount of life force required, and could only come up with a terrifying number. Even for a scholar who was proficient in the science of life, it was an extravagant delusion. But for Lily, who was also a cyborg, it was so simple. Her own blood was the quintessential miracle, which could be broken down and processed into any inferior material at any time. No, it could be said that Lily, who was registered as the goddess of the underworld, was the manifestation of pure life. With this group of fearless cyborgs, the tide of darkness transformed by Kush was actually contained. The situation seemed to be turning for the better. Just when Huaishur's tense mood relaxed a little, he felt a violent tremor under his feet. In the direction of the rear deck, there was a roar of an explosion. It was as if a crazy passenger had completely broken through the deck of the ship. The short-circuited wires brought flames, igniting everything. Thick smoke and flames rose. The cruise ship was wailing. The miracle that the White Crown King had cast on the ship was gradually losing its effect. Under the illumination of the flames, on the cracked rails, the sails that were riddled with holes swelled in the wind. Debris constantly peeled off from the gorgeous cruise ship and fell into the sea, gradually melting into a handful of mud. The original appearance of the sail ship appeared. It was as if it was absorbing the lives of the dead, full of killing and death. Its speed was getting faster and faster, as if it was flying above the sea of blood. "Don't waste any more time, bastard!" In the midst of the fighting, the captain turned around, with a pipe in his mouth that he had snatched from somewhere, and roared at Huai Shi, "If this continues, this ship is going to sink. If you still want to live to reach the New World, hurry up and get to work." A crack had already appeared on his face. It was obvious that under such rough driving, his body, like his ship, would not be able to hold on for much longer. Without needing him to urge, Huai Shi had already taken this opportunity to rush into the depths of the tide of origin substance. After a few nimble jumps, he finally returned to the mess of dead and injured in the restaurant. Breaking through the last half of the remaining glass, he jumped into the mess and seized the momentary opportunity to look around. In the legends, Kush was good at hiding his soul outside of his body to avoid the enemy's attack. Because of this, he earned the name of an immortal and an immortal. According to Huai Shi's speculation, since he had decided to leave his hometown, Kush naturally would not leave his soul in the enemy's territory. He would definitely carry a container to preserve his soul with him. Even if his soul was now shattered, it was still the basis of this terrifying obsession. Soon, he saw the wheelchair that was still intact under the corrosion of the decaying origin substance in the surging mud. "It's here." Huai Shi ignored the wind behind him and raised the axe in his hand, throwing it with all his might into the mud. In the blink of an eye, after the shrill sound of breaking air, there was the sound of steel breaking. The wheelchair fell apart. Chapter 150. After a wail, the wheelchair fell apart in the mud. In the blink of an eye, the mud shook violently. It worked? Huai Shi was overjoyed. Then he felt a chill in his chest, and a military knife protruded from his chest. As expected, it didn't work. When he turned around in a daze, he saw Clement, who seemed to have crawled out of the mud, and his ferocious face. A pitch-black aura constantly emerged from his body. "Oh my God, you're also a traitor?" Huai Shi was stunned. At that moment, the dark substance that had been silent for a moment shook violently again, triggering a riot, and swept in all directions more violently than before. Clement opened his mouth and suddenly spat out the dark substance that had drilled into his lungs. His scarlet eyes were filled with frenzy. "Can't," he murmured hoarsely, "can't stop yet." Since the beginning of the game, his former teammate, the unlucky child Clement, who had turned into an NPC. No, at this moment, how much of him was the original him? As the black mud covered him, his coat rustled, and soon it turned into a solemn, pitch-black robe. No matter whether it was the bow tie or the cuffs, they were all meticulously done. His distorted face calmed down again, and he was already unrecognizable. Without the desolation and paleness of many years of frustration, he became arrogant and handsome, with deep indifference and cruelty, just like a natural emperor. This was the real Kush. Not the pitiful worm in the wheelchair who couldn't even speak properly, but the terror and disaster that walked the world, the immortals, the undying, the shapeshifters, the wizards, and the demon king who swallowed all enemies. Even though he was already dead. However, that huge obsession still relied on other people's bodies to walk in this world, bringing destruction and death. Huai Shi opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. "Brother, we're already dead, can't we just stop?" "Can't stop yet," He raised his head stiffly and stared at Huaishi's face. At least, let Yaga go to the new world. If you don't King mess around, everyone can go to the new world alive. In that instant, Koseki pulled out his military knife and slashed at Huaishi's head again. Huaishi turned around in an instant, blood spurting out from his chest. He raised the saber and axe in his hand, blocking the swift and fierce sword. He felt a burst of numbness in his wrist. The terrifying power and killing intent almost stunned him. The wound on his chest was not that important. Lice don't itch when there are too many. Compared to the torture of the punishment for breaking an oath, this pain was like being bitten by a mosquito. As for the damage caused by the puncture, it was nothing to Huaishi now that he was high on drugs. Huaishi took a step back amidst the clanging sound of steel colliding. He lowered his head to look at the wound on his chest that was slowly healing. He raised his head to stare at Kush, who was closing in on him. His solemn footsteps were precise to the millimeter, and his posture was flawless. When he raised his military saber to his chest, his eyes were cold and solemn, as well as a wave of killing intent that burst forth. Huaishi took a deep breath and felt his palms begin to sweat. For the first time since he boarded the ship, he encountered such a flawless opponent. But for some reason, what followed was not fear, but excitement. It was the joy and anticipation of meeting a worthy opponent. Therefore, the short saber and axe were spread out from his side as he raised his arms. The Theravada dual saber technique, which had been changed beyond recognition, was now revealed. Whether it was a Roman dagger fight or something else, Huaishi was eager to change his posture, looking for an attacking distance from both sides as they advanced and retreated. In that instant, the leather boots of both of them stood still on the broken floor at the same time. The blood-red pupils burst forth with the light of killing intent. The undead and the vampire broke through the air at that moment. The radiance of steel collided with each other, bursting out a sharp sound, followed by a series of thunderous roars. It was the mournful sound of an axe and a military saber breaking through the air. With only a narrow Slavic military saber, Kush closed in step by step, suppressing Huaishi's dual weapons. He conveyed his strength and will through the narrow saber in an almost violent manner. He forcefully resisted the slashing of the axe and swung his fist at Huaishi's inner elbow. After parrying the saber, he raised his fist and smashed it on Huaishi's chin. Huaishi only felt his vision go black. Immediately, he felt his feet leave the ground. He was actually suspended in the air by this punch. Then, the military saber slashed and cut open a wound in his chest. In midair, his short saber fell from his hand and pierced through Kush's left arm. Both of them took a step back. Huaishi panted violently. He felt his ears ringing, a bloody taste oozing out of his mouth, and a stinging pain in his chest. The cut was so deep that his bones could be seen. Kush pulled out the blade nailed to his arm expressionlessly and raised the military saber again. Huaishi shook his head and tried to dispel the dizziness in his head. He clenched the handle of the axe tightly. "What a pity," he whispered softly. "It would be nice if there was some background music." He missed old Lou like never before. He desperately hoped that he would give him another MP3 player, the kind that cost 20 to 30,000. As if hearing his prayer, the cruise ship roared and the ceiling shattered. A line of sparks flew down and ignited the table in the corner. A flame was ignited. The light illuminated the scarlet eyes of both of them. Huaishi's face was reflected in Kush's hollow eyes. It seemed that a trace of brutal excitement emerged. He clenched the military saber tightly. Again. Huaishi growled and rushed forward again. Bang! The blade of the axe and the military saber collided, creating sparks. Both of them raised their fists at the same time and punched each other in the face. They took a step back, then clenched their weapons and slashed at each other with a mournful cry. A sharp roar burst forth. Huaishi roared. Amidst the sound of burning and shattering, iron collided with iron, stirring up each other. The vampire and the immortal clenched their fists and moved forward again. The metallic light was like a stream of water bursting out from the scorching air. It illuminated their scarlet eyes. Do you see it? The atmosphere is starting to heat up. Huaishur tilted his head and spat out a mouthful of poisonous blood. He muttered softly, "It's a pity that there's no applause." Kush's face was expressionless. He took a step forward and slashed again with his saber. Amidst the roar of the shattering, flames spread, eroding the deck inch by inch. The sludge formed by the dark origin substance was turbulent. It erupted 3 times like a tide, making it difficult for all the cyborg sailors to suppress it. But when the burly captain smashed a door and pulled out an iron box from a crack in the wall, the situation reversed once again. Inside the box, a row of black guns that did not belong to this era shone with a cold steel light. "Ha! Old buddy!" The captain, who had a pipe in his mouth, laughed sinisterly. He pulled out a machine gun that should have been welded to a tank, dragged a long chain of bullets, and pulled the trigger at the monsters formed by the dark origin substance. Gunfire roared. Thunder and lightning burst forth from the rotating muzzle. Die, 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 die. After the fatal chain of fire, the captain's angry roar could be heard. "This is what happens to trash like you if you don't buy tickets." The other crew members also picked up their guns and short cannons from the box and rushed toward the enemy. They changed from Iron King Kong to Rambo, fighting the monsters without fear of death. In an instant, the scene changed from the Middle Ages to a modern army fighting monsters. "Oh my God, give me one too!" Huaishur's eyes were red with envy. "Give me one, give me one!" "No more." The captain glanced at him from the corner of his eyes. "Why are you playing with guns at such a young age? Go play with your axe." Bang! Huaishur wasn't paying attention and was knocked back by Kush. He almost fell into the hole in the floor. Kush closed in step by step, swinging his knife again. Then, a loud sound burst forth. A huge gap appeared on Kush's head. Behind the gap, Lily, who was at the entrance of the restaurant, was holding the rifle that had killed the pharaoh. She was panting heavily. The Demon King's movements were sluggish. Huaishur roared angrily, and the axe in his hand chopped down at the Demon King's face. Kush retreated. The blade of the axe split open his sternum, and blood spurted out. But Kush's movements didn't stop. The military knife in his hand fell, but he saw Huaishur raise his left hand. He faced the blade and gripped it tightly. In the momentary stalemate, Huaishur raised his head and slammed it down on Kush's broken head. Kush staggered and took a step back. Huaishur advanced again, and the blade of the axe chopped down, cutting off his left arm. Then, Huaishur roared and charged forward. Using the broken body as support, he suddenly slammed it onto the table. He kicked with all his might. Kush fell to the ground. Chance. Huaishur gripped the blade of the axe with both hands and aimed it at his head. With a roar, he chopped it down. This time, he had no way out. But a fierce light burst forth from his empty eyes. He raised the broken military knife, but he didn't dodge or block. Instead, he stabbed it toward Huaishur's head. Mutual destruction. At that moment, a crisp sound suddenly rang out in the restaurant. Kush's movements froze, and he stopped in place. The blade of the axe splashed blood, leaving deep gouges on the floor. Victory and defeat had been decided. But it wasn't just the broken body that stopped. Even the surging tide of darkness stiffened in place, as if it had been frozen. Then, an ear-piercing wail burst forth. Huaishur turned around and saw Lily, who had thrown herself into the middle of the restaurant, and her raised hands. It was a soup spoon that had been broken. That was Kush's last resort. So, in an instant, the surging tide of darkness rolled back. Countless monsters wailed as they melted and gathered in the quagmire again. The mud convulsed and collapsed, quickly evaporating. In the end, only a decrepit and old body was left, falling to the ground. It was the last remnant of the Demon King named Kush. It was about to dissipate. The stooped old man tried to reach out with his hand, trying to feel for something, but he couldn't touch anything. In the end, his hand fell limply, and Yaga rushed forward and grabbed it tightly. "Brother, I'm here. I'm here." The decrepit old man tried hard to open his eyes, trying to see her clearly. After a long time, he finally distinguished that haggard face. As if he had been liberated, a smile of relief appeared on his face from fear. "Run, Yaga, run." The old man's voice was hoarse as he shouted her name with all his might. "Run. Run to a place where they can't catch you. Live well." In the rapid dissipation, Kush shed murky tears as he stared at his last family member. "I'm sorry," this was his final farewell. His body dissipated in the wind. In the end, only a handful of scattered dust was left, falling on Yaga's burnt skirt. "Big brother, we already have nowhere to run." Yaga stared blankly at the gravel that flowed down her palm. The wrinkles on her face twitched as if she wanted to cry, but she couldn't shed any tears. The unkempt witch shook her head numbly. She looked around at all this, at everyone's faces, as if she was looking at a joke. "From the moment we boarded the ship, everything was already destined. We are all dust, dust left behind by the wheels." No one responded. No one was able to respond to her voice. There were only corpses everywhere. Almost all the passengers had died. Huaishur subconsciously shielded Lily behind him, carefully guarding against her. But he didn't see her rush forward madly to avenge her brother as he expected. She just stared blankly at all this. After a long, long time, scarlet tears flowed from the corners of her eyes. Slowly, she raised her hands and covered her old face, but it was difficult to suppress the despair and sadness in her heart. Why? She choked and asked hoarsely, "Who can tell me, why is this happening? My husband, my daughter, my everything. God, isn't it enough to take all of this away? Why do you have to take him away from me? Tell me." She held the ashes of her brother in her hands and screamed at the cold, dark sky outside the broken wall. Why is this happening? The world was silent. There was only the sound of flames burning, and her broken cries. Ah! She climbed up from the ground, stepping on the broken wreckage. With tears of blood, she looked up at the sky and screamed, "I curse all of you! I curse all of you! One day, you will die in your ambition that even this world can't accommodate. I curse all of you! Do you hear me? Do you hear me?" No one responded. In the dead silence, she seemed to have finally understood something and lowered her head tiredly. "At least, I won't be your plaything. Never, never." She finally turned around and looked at the cyborgs, Huaishur and Lily behind him, as if she was pitying them. Shaking his head slightly, he leaped into the air. Quietly, she fell into the quiet sea of blood and gradually sank into the darkness that was difficult to be seen by the naked eye. Silently melted. In the dead silence, no one spoke. Huaishur looked down at her in disbelief until the numb face disappeared in the deepest part of the darkness. Until now, he still couldn't believe that Papaya had chosen to commit suicide. Was she crazy? She must be crazy. Ai Ching knocked on the armrest. But why she went crazy is still unknown. Besides, you'd better worry about yourself. Ai Ching lowered her eyes and stared at the countdown in the status bar of the character card. Punishment for breaking an oath 003. Countdown 3, 2, 1. At that moment, Huaishur widened his eyes in shock and staggered to the ground. He saw the silver circuits slowly emerging on the back of his hand. They burned his flesh and blood, sizzling. An unprecedented pain and thirst struck him. He was almost defeated in an instant. The roars of countless people echoed in his ears and turned into a dark tide, drowning his soul inch by inch. Paracelsus, kill. Kill that deformed creation. Kill at all costs. Kill. 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 Countless chaotic voices echoed in his consciousness and instantly drained all his energy, causing him to spasm and twitch violently on the floor. It was like an epileptic patient. In a trance, Huaishe felt that his consciousness seemed to be pulled out by an invisible force and thrown into the darkness. The sound of the wind blew past his face. The fall seemed to be endless. After a long time that was long enough for his consciousness to disappear, he finally fell to the bottom of the abyss. He prostrated himself under the pale altar. Holy light shone from above and scattered on his body. It was like sulfuric acid being evenly splashed on a vampire's skin, causing him to scream and his soul to tremble. In the burning holy flames, the thin archbishop held his scepter and slowly turned around. He looked down at the screaming Huaishe and said coldly, "Don't always disappoint people, Abraham. Complete your mission." His every word was like a hammer, pounding on Huaishe's remaining consciousness and ravaging his will. The part of him that belonged to the vampire quickly expanded, bringing with it the commandments and missions that went deep into his soul. He said, "Kill that damned heretic!" "No!" In the midst of his convulsions, Huaishe raised his face covered in snot and saliva and gave him an apologetic smile. "Sorry, I refuse." At that moment, the archbishop frowned in disappointment. The holy light left. Huaishe was abandoned in the abyss. Then Ai Qing saw, the last player sitting opposite her revealed a ferocious smile from the shadows. He threw the dice in his hand. When Huaishe opened his eyes in a daze, he saw Lily's pale face and felt a wave of hunger. Then, he felt a sharp pain in his limbs. When he tried to raise his head, he heard a crisp sound from his neck, as if something was about to break. He raised his arms with difficulty and saw his 10 fingers that were as shriveled as withered twigs and his arms that were covered in cracks, just like charcoal that had been burnt out. Silver, commandments, missions. Everything that Abraham once believed in was collapsing little by little. From the inside out, he was killed inch by God's wrath. From the inside out, no blind spots were left. Perhaps this was the redemption that Van Helsing was looking forward to. Huaishe could clearly feel that this was originally a setting hidden in the vampire's stigmata. Through his shallow knowledge of metals, he could sensitively perceive the essence of this miracle. A miracle from the darkness forged in the silver cornerstone. The almost ingenious construction of the power of a mutant gave it unparalleled lethality. Then, on the first day of its birth, it was destined to perish one day. All that was needed was a gentle push from above, and everything that was floating in the air would collapse like a pile of sand, vanishing into thin air under the purification of the silver alloy that was poured into the bone marrow. In the end, only a silver-white skeleton was left. This was the final punishment for breaking the oath. Chapter 151. No. This is not right either. Lily's face was pale, and she stared blankly at the broken potion bottles on the ground. No matter what method she tried, there was no way to stop the silver flames spreading in his body. It was like pulling out the most crucial piece from the stack of building blocks. Collapse and destruction were inevitable. This was the limitation of nature. He was destroying himself. No matter how many life-prolonging potions were injected, it was like putting out a fire with firewood. It was useless in front of this structure that was bound to self-destruct. Perhaps it was as the Holy Spirit genealogy said. Unless it was really the mercy of the gods, he could no longer be saved. Perhaps from the beginning, he was destined not to receive the so-called salvation. No, it should be said that the salvation promised by the Church had long been implanted in his bone marrow along with the blessed silver and holy objects. With just a small signal, a fatal chain would purify the vampire's original sin, and vampire together death was the ultimate release. As for whether the illusory gate of heaven would open for him, it was not within the scope of the Church's consideration. Without guessing, Huaishe could see the scene of his character summon cards, HP being rapidly deducted. Little by little, it was directly erased from the upper limit until the moment it reached 0. Everything would come to an end. Ah, is this the fate of a traitor? In a trance, Huaishe whispered softly, feeling a drop of water falling on his face. There were still people by his side, trying in vain to do anything, again and again, until they completely fell into despair. Save him. Lily raised her head and stared at her own kind, almost crying out, "Doesn't the White Crown King have any other gifts? Anything that can save people is good." All the crew members were silent, lowering their eyes in pity. "Sorry, child." The captain looked away. "You need to understand that for puppets like us who can't decide when to be born and when to die, the power to save others is too extravagant." Lily looked at him blankly, as if she could not accept it. After a long time, she lowered her head tiredly and stared at her hands. She could not help but choke with sobs. "But clearly I've already gotten life." No one spoke again. They lowered their eyes. "I'm not dead yet. Can you guys not put on a solemn look like you're about to lay a wreath?" Huaishe tried his best to open his eyes, but he heard the sound of his eyelids cracking. The fine cracking sound spread across his face, and as he propped himself up, more and more sounds burst out from his body. "Help me up," Huaishe said softly. "I can still see you off." Under everyone's stunned expressions, Huaishe climbed up from the ground, supported himself with his axe, raised his head with difficulty, and looked around. Then, he took a deep breath. "Hey friend. I'm about to die, so you have to come out and see me, right?" He roared with all his might, feeling as if his lungs were about to burst. "Or are you saying that you're going to hide until the very end and not show your face?" In the silence, everyone looked at each other. In the end, their gazes actually gathered behind Huaishe, full of shock and astonishment. A huge shadow had unknowingly appeared behind Huaishe. No, he was sitting on the ground. From the very beginning, he had been quietly enjoying all of this, sitting in the VIP seats close by, watching this battle play out. But no one noticed. Under the hood, a familiar sigh came. "To be honest, I didn't plan to do this. I wanted to at least let you be my last farewell." As he spoke, he lifted the hood, revealing a face. "Yujun?" Huaishe was stunned for a moment, frowning. It was actually Yujun, who was beheaded on the first night. But no, he had already seen his corpse, which was almost rotten. Or, could he have survived with only his head left? No, it wasn't Yujun. Even if Ai Qing was silent now, Huaishe could make such a judgment based on the clues she had given him before. "Who are you?" "HM? I thought you would admit your mistake like Yin." Yujun pinched his chin, raised his eyebrows slightly, and his voice became hoarse and low. "To be honest, it's not polite to meet people with this face. Unfortunately, in order to make you believe that I died, my original head was also beaten up. You see, along the way, I pieced together a ship of Theseus from the Mayflower, and in the end, only my head is left." He joked leisurely, pulled up his hair slightly, and showed Huaishe the fine scars below. Huaishe was stunned. "Old Shaw?" "Yes, it's me." Old Shaw nodded. Yujun's expression was calm, not knowing whether it was the new head not working well, or he was always so calm and collected. "You killed Yujun?" "Lei Feizhou and I." Old Shaw shrugged slightly. "We formed an alliance on the first day on the ship, but Yujun saw it, you know." "What about Yin?" "It was also me." Old Shaw replied frankly. "To complete my secret, I needed Yaga's resurrection potion in his hands, but he refused to give it to me." "Let me guess." Huaishe smiled. "I'm next. Even if I don't do it, you're going to die, aren't you?" Old Shaw glanced at the fragments peeling off his face with pity. "To be honest, I once regarded you as my strongest competitor. After all, your performance was... well, it was amazing, almost impossible to guard against. Moreover, before this, you had the strongest lethality of all of us. An executioner of the Holy Spirit lineage was a perfect match for you." I made so many precautions against you, but I didn't expect that you couldn't even complete your own secret. As if everything was as clear as day, he calmly stated the facts. Unfortunately, why sure, you're going to lose this game. Should I congratulate you for being the champion of the betrayal competition? Why sure asked indifferently, clenching the handle of the axe in his hand. Is the achievement that you and I have achieved really important, why sure? You don't have to be angry about it, just like I won't be proud of it. Old Shaw suddenly laughed. In the end, aren't we all chess pieces? Even if we call ourselves players, we are still bound by the rules, and it's difficult to transcend the chessboard of the gods. From the beginning, our mission and will have already determined everything that we have today, not from the so-called luck and coincidence. Maybe KP holds the dice in his hand and tells you that it's all probability, but he doesn't tell you that the gods never throw dice. Everything is destined, why sure? He stared at the young man in front of him, but as if he was looking at Ai Ching outside the chessboard, he told him word by word, the ending was already decided before the beginning. And now, it's just time for the curtain call. Why be angry or sad? You want to tell me that everything is destined, and then what? So that you can accept what you've done with a clear conscience? Huaisher asked. Or do you feel that you have no choice, so you don't need to feel any burden? But that doesn't prevent me from winning, does it? Old Shaw said coldly. If you have any last words, I hope you can say them quickly. I'm in a hurry. Do what? Huaisher laughed. Reincarnate. Old Shaw also laughed. Kill, of course. At that moment, a bestial gloominess appeared on that calm face, full of murderous intent. Then, the iron light burst forth, and thunder roared. The axe blade broke through the air, and an unprecedented cold light bloomed from Huaisher's hand. It was as if the pain of breaking an oath did not exist, and from his broken face, the dark pupils were ignited, like the burning hell, ruthless and ferocious. What a coincidence, Huaisher said. Me too. At that moment, all the cyborgs who were on standby raised the weapons in their hands, aimed at Old Shaw's huge body, and pulled the triggers. Deadly gunfire turned into a torrential rain gushing out. In the blink of an eye, Old Shaw was engulfed. Countless pieces of burning steel pierced through his flesh and blood body, causing tragic injuries. In the blink of an eye, he was chiseled into rotten flesh riddled with holes. Amidst Huaisher's roar, the axe blade flashed and chopped off the grinning head. The huge body crashed to the ground, blood spreading everywhere. Bah, I thought you were more powerful. The captain spat out a mouthful of thick phlegm in disdain. Just average. That's it? In the pool of blood, Yu Jun's head slowly rolled, his lips moving. Is there anything else? Huaisher was stunned. Then, he saw a mocking smile on that face. Guess what my mission is? At that moment, Huaisher saw a black shadow fly out from under Old Shaw's broken cloak, whistling towards him like a sharp blade. In an instant, the terrifying speed was even higher than that of a vampire. Even with Huaisher's reflexes, he could not detect it. He only realized that he had been attacked by the afterimages he saw. When he lowered his head, he only saw a curled tentacle slowly retracting. And there was a big hole in his chest. Between the bones that were gradually metallized, there was a tear that penetrated from his chest to his back. In an instant, all of Huaisher's defenses had been shattered by this devastating blow. Then, the tentacle curled up slightly, as if it was facing a gentle breeze and drizzle, and it swept across casually, ignoring the countless bullets that were fired at it. Bang! The axe in Huaisher's hand flew out, flying in the air, and finally fell obliquely to the ground, cutting into the broken deck. And Huaisher had already flown out and smashed into the ruins. Countless cracks spread on his broken body, like porcelain that was barely glued back together after being smashed. It was about to fall apart. In the intense dizziness and trance, Huaisher heard Old Shaw's words. It was like asking and answering his own question. He slowly got up from the ground, bathed in the storm of bullets, slowly picked up Eugene's head, and put it on his neck again. It was as if he was wearing a hat. The flesh and blood closed, and no abnormalities could be seen. My mission is actually very simple. He smiled and pulled off the tattered cloak wrapped around his body, revealing the ferocious body hidden in the darkness. It's just an advancement. At that moment, his true face was revealed under the reflection of the sea of blood. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.